From a bunker in the middle of a dark forest, a quiet hum and buzzing of devices is heard incessantly. The corridors are constantly patrolled by a crowd of armed soldiers who silently carry out their duties. Inside the laboratory, the workers don't even pay attention to the next victim of experiments. The boy, wearing a shirt with a number consisting of 3 zeros, is strapped into a chair, surrounded on all sides by monitors. A bulky helmet-like device is attached to his head. There are 2 people watching him, a man who is looking at the next unfortunate person with a grin, and a girl who is standing nearby with aloofness. As soon as the first one finishes his speech about the guy now completely belonging to the embryo organization, the woman decides to check with a short question how the brainwashing went. The young man, whose green eyes are completely empty, does not react to her words in any way. Let's go back a little while, when a man named Hank was lazily fiddling with a controller in his hands, sitting at a computer and discussing the details of an order with his boss. After which he puts on a virtual reality helmet and gets down to his work, pumping up accounts in a popular online game. On the one hand, the man did this just to feed himself, but on the other hand, he loves to play. Before he could log into the server, his avatar was surrounded by a crowd of people, among whom was an elf journalist. In a trembling voice, he asks if he can take a short interview from our hero. The boy worried in vain because he was only glad that people with cameras were meeting him. However, never before had such a mysterious fighter agreed so easily. So the blonde clapped a couple of times in front of the shocked elf's face, reminding him that he was, in fact, a busy man. Having come out of his stupor, the boy immediately moved on to the main question about the guy's 47th place in the tournament, where the first 100 are the strongest players. But it turned out that the guy would not and did not intend to join the military service. The journalist was once again shocked by our hero's answer and dared to ask the reason. But he, with a sly smile, said that it was a secret, and in general he needed to be told about another thing. Walking around the boy, he quickly stood right in front of the camera, attracting the operator, after which he takes a deep breath, as if he is about to say something of utmost importance. And then, with the smile of an absolutely self-confident person, he begins to advertise his account boosting services from a professional with 10 years of experience. The elf timidly knocks on the clapperboard, trying to stop this chaos on live television, since such services are prohibited. The guy picks his nose with displeasure, but he is used to such a reaction from those around him. The man takes off his virtual reality helmet, snorting in displeasure because he doesn't understand what's wrong with the boost. This year, he has already upgraded more than 10 accounts in the extremely popular game Star C, which uses full immersion technology. As one of the very first testers and later fans of this project, Hank spent more than 10 years in it. For him, the Star Sea is much more real than the dreary world outside. And then the man receives a message about a new order and the payment arrives on his phone. Exhaling tiredly from the interrupted rest, he settles himself more comfortably and puts his helmet back on. At that time, our hero thought that his life would always be so simple and boring. Flashes, bright light, and piercing pain. This is what greets the man instead of the usual starting city. Alarms are blaring non-stop from all sides, as if there was a fire. He struggles to move his hand and begins to smell a strong, burning smell. The man tries his best to understand what is happening, but his head is torn apart by severe pain. Meanwhile, the workers begin to run in all directions, shouting that the sample has come to life and that they need to tell Mrs. Hell about it. One of them starts calling additional security, fearing that they might lose control. The man is still surprised by such an unusual start to the game, and the soldiers appear in front of him in just a couple of seconds. He jumps up, deciding that it's not the time to think about what's happening now, but rather to get out of here as quickly as possible. Full of confidence, the hero stands in a stance, preparing to parry the blow of the bat. But as soon as the soldier's weapon hits his hands, he becomes even more convinced that something is clearly wrong here. Tears involuntarily flowed from his eyes because of how much pain he was in. But this is impossible. The game has a limit of only 40%. He needs to get out of it urgently. The guard, as soon as the guy stops trying to resist, reports that control over the sample has been seized. The metal door of the cell, which looks more like a concrete box, opens with a bang. Holding his bruised arm, the player sits down, leaning against the cold wall. He paid the developers a considerable sum, and it looks like the game is broken again. However, it is not too late to start over. And then the man notices that something strange has happened with the menu too. The screen only showed its specifications, but there was no exit button. Moreover, if you believe what is written, he is not even a player, but just an NPC, and the version of the game is the very first one. A year before, even a demo appeared. And then he sees his reflection, and this once again shocks him. It's hard to say how many times in these few minutes. Things get weirder because his avatar's face is so similar to his real face. With horror, he began to realize that it seemed like he had moved inside the Star Sea. And then the guy was pulled out of his thoughts by the creak of the opening door and a bright light from behind it. Pulling back slightly, he could barely make out the silhouettes of several people, led by a girl. She was tall, with long burgundy hair and wearing extremely provocative clothes. She looked at the living specimen emotionlessly, then declared that if he tried to escape again, he would die. Beads of sweat appeared on the guy's face. He knew perfectly well who stood before him. The boss killer of newbies. In the meantime, she ordered the boy to be sent for a blood test to find out how the serum affected him. This time, he no longer made any attempts to escape, remembering everything he knew about Hell in the first versions of the game. Judging by the costumes of the NPCs surrounding him, they are in the original version of the Embryo organization. It turns out that he is in the Valkyrie laboratory, where they created a plan to develop super strong warriors. Their main goal is to overthrow the government. According to the plot, he will first be sent for brainwashing, and then must be used as cannon fodder. And while the guy was mentally outraged at how terrible the start of this game was, the blood test was completed. Again, the same scientist examined the hero with a crazy smile, coming to the conclusion that his period of irascibility had ended. After which he suggested opening the specimen's skull to obtain more information, but she was against it. After all, he was the first one to come back to life, so there's no point in just getting rid of him. The scientist snorted with displeasure, suggesting that they simply observe the boy. Hell, with a gloomy face, ordered that for everyone's safety he must be sent for a brainwashing. The hero had no doubt that in the end there would still be processing, but he was not going to give up so easily. The security around is at least level 5, some even level 8, but he only has level 1. And the worst thing is that the boss is here too, which means there is not even a tiny chance of escape. And then the guy gets an idea of how to do at least something that could save him. He tries to break free from the guard's hands and get closer to the cabinet. It contained a large quantity of various literature for laboratory assistants. The guy reaches out, grabbing the first thing he comes across. The guards were stunned for a split second by this, but quickly began to drag the strange specimen away. When that proves useless, they pull out a multitude of guns out of thin air and point them at the back of the guy's head. But this time they are stopped by a scientist who is interested in seeing what he wants to do. The guy quietly exhales. His crazy plan turned out to work after all. The main thing is not to seem suspicious. With an impassive face, he opens the book and begins to quickly study its contents. And once again, everything goes as it should, which surprised the guy himself. Even though he is a simple NPC, he has a player system that allows him to level up. The scientist in Hell look at him skeptically, starting to get tired of waiting for something else interesting. So the guy began to absorb the book with even greater persistence in order to have time to increase his experience points. The man suggested that the serum had enhanced the specimen's learning abilities. Hell is also pleasantly surprised, because if he becomes a brilliant fighter, their cannon fodder will increase in price. However, they are still going to clear the guy's brain. The guard first tries to take him away with words and then with force. And the guy tries to finish reading the last lines, which is why they start fighting over the book. And at the very moment when it is torn to shreds, a notification appears in front of the hero about receiving the profession of a novice mechanic. He smirks quietly, pleased with the adventure he was able to pull off just now. After this, the guy calmly gives himself to the guards, and soon the final preparations for brainwashing are completed. He is strapped into a chair and nervously clenches his hand into a fist. With a sly smile, the scientist laments how sad it would be if they ruined such a sample, and he hasn't had time to study its brain yet. Beads of sweat continue to roll down the guy's face. This man was a real madman. Meanwhile, Hell is also tired of listening to all this, so she orders to begin. After wishing the sample good luck, he suddenly starts working on all systems at once. The guy barely holds back a scream and involuntarily tries to break free from the shackles that hold him. In his ears, the monotonous voice of the warning system sounds, telling him that he does not have enough free will and that his brain will be erased in 15 seconds. To avoid this, you need to have at least 10 units of this parameter. Luckily, while reading, the guy managed to level up, and now he has the missing number of attributes. And so the cleaning machine finished working, and a notification appeared before the hero's eyes that he had managed to avoid this. So now he will have to show all his acting skills so as not to reveal himself prematurely. The guy closes his eyes, and at that moment Hell leans right towards him. The girl tells him right in his ear who he is now and who he is. From now on, Zero is his name, Embryo is his home, and the greatness of the organization is the only thing that should worry him. It takes a lot of effort for the guy not to look, not to move, not to react, because before he always missed Hell. But now she is so close, and her voice pierces right into the depths of the soul. Zero was so focused on his thoughts that he ignored the question about his name. But before the scientist could finish his lamentations about the fact that the experiment seemed to have failed, the guy timidly raised his voice. With empty eyes, as if there is not a single thought in his head other than those just hammered into him, he says his new name. The man suggested that the essence had enhanced the specimen's learning abilities, but that a side effect was a deterioration in emotional connection with the environment. And while the couple discussed whether cannon fodder needed feelings, Zero grinned, because he was not going to give up just like that. Hell tells the guards to take the sample to the break room, but it turns out that it hasn't been prepared yet. With a face full of indifference, the girl declares that she is taking Zero under her wing and he will be in her room. A barely noticeable blush appeared on the guy's face. He didn't understand why he should go to her. As a result, he had to constantly pull himself away from thoughts that were constantly going in the wrong direction. At this time, Hell reported to her superiors about the normalization of the sample's condition and received an order for its training. The girl, in a slightly less confident voice, asked if she could see her little sister. Zero looked away, trying to remember anything about her having relatives. Meanwhile, Hell was rudely reminded that she was only allowed to see her sister twice a month. She ended the call without a word, her hand struggling to hold the smartphone. Zero looked at the girl with a little regret and sadness. And then he almost jumps because Hell hits the wall with all her might with her free hand. The guy had already forgotten that this woman was not only a beauty, but also a terribly strong boss. She doesn't say anything, and it feels like she's completely forgotten about the existence of another person in the room. The blush on Zero's cheeks becomes more noticeable, and his face freezes in a state of shock. Hell calmly began to take off her clothes, remaining almost completely naked. And now, having finished with this, the girl finally notices the intense gaze that had been burning into her for several minutes. Zero looks away in shame and tries to calm down a little. But it was not to be. Hell grabs him by the shoulders and turns him straight towards her, after which she speaks into the guy's ear again, testing the remaining strength of his willpower. A little more and it will be revealed that he escaped brainwashing, which means it will be the end for him. But finally, this torture ends and the girl moves away from him, after which, without saying anything, he goes to bed and turns to the wall. And at that moment, Zero realizes that there is only one bed in the room. He lies down with his back to the girl, occupying the very edge of the bed and a small piece of the blanket. And then the guy gets kicked, and with such force that he not only falls, but also flips over in mid-flight. Moreover, having reached the wall, Zero almost crashed into it, so it took him a long time to even just come to consciousness. Let's move on to the next day, to the training ground. Hell tossed the confused boy a bulletproof vest before starting the lesson. And as soon as Zero managed to somehow put on protection, the girl quickly turned on her heel. After which she kicked her subordinate with such force that blood gushed from his mouth. Before he could do anything, Hell grabbed his hand, after which she pulled sharply, causing him to almost fall. But if only everything were so easy. Instead of throwing the guy or, on the contrary, stopping his fall, she hit him in the stomach with her knee a second time. Literally a minute had passed since the start of the training, and Zero was already lying on the ground, exhausted. However, this did not stop the girl at all, so she continued the execution. Their body armor is amazing, because with such force of blows from this lady, the first swing of her leg could have been the last for the hero. And so Hell finally decides to end the training, leaving the guy to continue lying on the ground. Despite today's beating, the guy is full of confidence, because today he was convinced that he can improve his skills. Zero didn't have long to live in peace because a new coach appeared on the horizon. This time, they were going to teach him how to shoot, and not some random soldier, but the head of the base, Bruce. After the guy crawled to the shooting range, they threw him a pistol with 10 bullets. The task is simple. Aim at the target's heads, but there is a nuance in the form of their constant movement. Zero still did not dare to express his indignation out loud about the difficulty of the task for a newbie. He holds the pistol with slightly shaking hands, and his best shot is to hit the target's body. Of course, there is nothing surprising about this after all. His new avatar has almost zero characteristics, but nevertheless, it is annoying to miss all 10 times. And then, without any warning, someone cut his shoulder with a knife. Zero immediately clamped his hand over the wound, shocked that once again his trainer was a madman and a psycho. It seems that this organization only accepts people with such special features. Meanwhile, Bruce licked the blood off the knife with a grin, saying that this punishment would happen every time until the guy completed the task. Zero clenches his fists in anger, wanting to do something to this psychopath. But he quickly realizes that he is too weak now, which means it would be monstrous stupidity. After all, now he only has one life. NPCs, unlike players, do not respawn. So Zero takes up his gun again and aims at the targets, to the taunts of yet another miss. After a few more attempts to complete the task, the guy's shirt turned into a pile of rags, and it looked like his skin would soon be hanging around in almost the same way. The scientist and Hell watch this with displeasure. One is indignant that it would be better if they gave him this sample already, and the other reminds that the organization is against this. The man smirks, confident that once all the value is sucked out of Zero, it will be brought to him practically on a silver platter. Towards evening, the training ends and the guy is given new clothes, after which he returns with difficulty to Hell's room. Without taking her eyes off her manicure, she discontentedly expresses that Zero showed himself very poorly today. The guy is so tired that he just hopes that at least this woman will do without having fun with a knife or anything else. Hell, as usual, doesn't pay attention to the guy's gaze and simply tells him to follow her. After which, having brought the guy to a strange bathroom, he orders him to undress. And again, he cannot understand what this woman wants from him. Is it really true that they should take a bath together? Hell begins to get irritated that he can't even do such simple things, but just stands there like a pillar. So all he can do is hope that this isn't a test and finally take off his clothes. As soon as he finished, the girl brazenly began to examine his entire body, especially the places where most of the wounds had occurred. Zero mentally screams that this is completely beyond the bounds of decency, and Hell looks at him with displeasure, as if condemning him with every cell of her body. She is not happy with the guy's behavior and how he showed himself today, which is why she considers him a complete coward. And suddenly, the girl quite carefully takes Zero's hand, intertwining their fingers, after which he takes him into the bathroom, instructing him that he should try hard if he wants to live. Otherwise, he will quickly end up in Wilson's autopsy. The guy smiles slightly, but they are still too quick to write him off, and even more so to send him to this scientist's desk. And once again, our hero's happiness did not last long. Hell pushes him sharply, causing him to fall into the bathtub, knocking away everything that could still remain even slightly intact after today's training. The girl herself leaves, explaining that this is a regulating liquid, after which the wounds will heal by morning. And as if mockingly, she adds that the guy should feel at home, although you can see a little concern in her gaze. Meanwhile, Zero sits angry because of his expectations being deceived once again, and thinks about everything that is happening. He has little time left. He needs to become as strong as possible as quickly as possible. A few weeks later, Wilson again tells Hell that he will go ask the management for permission to autopsy Zero. The girl is skeptical about this because he recently received another rejection. In turn, the man grins, noting that it looks like she just got attached to this scum. Hell looks away, completely emotionless and denying any suspicion of this, after which he walks away and Wilson demands that the girl stop. If she really answered the truth, stop interfering in something that is none of her business. Entering the room, she immediately begins to scold Zero for digging through some trash. But he, looking at Hell like a beaten kitten, continues to try to get the gun into working order. The girl repeats once again that unusable things are trash, and they just need to be thrown away. And if he cannot grow, then he himself will become useless and discarded. Zero, in response to this, timidly replied that he had completely repaired the gun. Assembling and disassembling weapons brings experience points, albeit small, which is why he was so active in it. Hell was skeptical about the guy's words because that weapon was completely hopeless. However, she agreed to see for herself how it worked, so they left the bunker. The girl, about to say that the weapon was still unsuitable for combat, fired several times. But to her surprise, all the shots were perfect. Not even a minute passed before all the birds in the area became a simple pile of corpses. Hell immediately reported to the authorities about the success of the sample and received permission to send it to the armory. She also reported that to the person who is currently watching this video on YouTube, she sends an airy, sweet, warm, and sticky kiss. In return, she asks only to leave a comment, like, and subscribe to the channel. All the best to you, my beloved YouTube viewer. Now, Zero is also absolutely satisfied with the result of his work, because he could not even dream of such a thing. And now on the surface, a deep, dark night has already set in. Hell brought the guy to the main weapons warehouse of the base, deciding that he would be interested in digging through everything that was there. While Zero looked around in surprise, the girl continued her explanation. They were surrounded on all sides by a variety of weapons, from pistols to missiles. The guy was delighted, because this way he would be able to quickly raise a fairly high level. And before leaving, Hell remembered that he liked the book about mechanics, so she brought a couple more similar ones. Literally a couple of hours passed, and the girl was already standing in her room, seething with anger and misunderstanding. She doesn't understand why the hell Zero came back to her. The guy himself was sitting opposite her at that time, not understanding what was wrong. An awkward silence hung between them, and it put more pressure on the girl, because Zero was simply waiting for an explanation of what the problem was. Although, when Hell said that they couldn't live together because he was a man, it was quite difficult to hold back an indignant cry about how long it took her to realize this. Tired of explaining, the girl simply stood at the door and began pointing towards the exit, as if chasing out a lost puppy. An offended Zero crawled away, and Hell, with the same displeasure, said that she was waiting for him only in the morning in the training pavilion. Suddenly, she remembers one thing, after which she hands the guy a gun. The girl thinks that since he fixed it, it will now belong to him. Softening slightly when Zero had already moved a decent distance away, she even wished him luck. The guy stopped, surprised to hear something like that, especially after the angry tirade that had happened a couple of minutes ago. He turned around slightly, trying to understand why her mood was changing so abruptly. Then the girl herself turned to him and with concern and worry in her eyes asked the guy to survive. And so Zero began to spend all of his free time at his desk in the warehouse. Exhaling tiredly, he finished restoring another piece of iron, this time the sight. However, as soon as he finished, a smug grin appeared on his face again, because in just 2 days he was able to get the 3rd level. This means that there are no more than 6 months left before the escape, and by that time, no one will be able to stop him. After a considerable period of time, the situation at the training pavilion has remained virtually unchanged. There wasn't a day that Hell couldn't literally knock a guy off his feet and stomp him into the floor with one blow. She didn't have any grandiose expectations for Zero, but she didn't think that after 3 months he would still be this weak. Meanwhile, he was simply feigning helplessness so as not to reveal the truth about his real achievements. The girl extended her hand to him, helping him up and reminding him that Wilson had already been approaching management every week, wanting to open the guy's brain. And although they are still in no hurry to make a decision, it is clearly not in their interest to waste their resources on such a worthless example. Hell is already directly asking the guy how long, in his opinion, he can last here at this rate before he becomes completely uninteresting to the management. Zero continues to look at the girl with emptiness in his eyes during such questions. After training, the guy began his main routine, developing weapon repair skills. By this time, he had been moved from the main warehouse to a medium-sized room. Zero, pretending not to be distracted from his work, looks away to the side where the camera is hanging. But it had already been turned off, which confirms the assumption that the embryo was already completely disappointed in him. However, Zero himself is now only better off because of this, since there is less unnecessary attention. He pulls out a working pistol from the desk drawer. Dismantling items practically doesn't bring him experience points anymore, so he decides to try moving on to a more complex process, upgrading items. Moreover, the difficulty is not so much in modifying something, but in returning it to its original form, so as not to raise unnecessary questions from others. Zero doesn't even have time to start working when he is distracted by extraneous noise from behind the door. With lightning speed, he hides the traces of what he was just about to do. Another specimen, number 1, walks up to him with a confident gait and without any permission. And immediately he mockingly reports the news, which was already obvious to everyone, about the organization's disappointment and the reduction in funding. Zero again puts on his usual mask of absolute emptiness in his eyes and detachment from everything. Taking a closer look at the number on the guy's shirt, he comes to the conclusion that this is the second sample that was able to survive after him. And at this moment, he is already brazenly leaning on Zero's shoulder, recalling how many resources were spent on him at first. And despite all this, instead of showing results, the first sample simply digs through a pile of garbage. The guy grabs Zero by the collar, continuing to point out to him how insignificant he is compared to him. After all, it is the first number that the organization decides to put in place of the 0. Zero doesn't try to get a word in edgewise, knowing that the man in front of him has been completely brainwashed. At that time, he ordered the workers to take out the boxes and clear the premises. This was probably exactly the result that the Valkyrie expected to receive, a model with combat talent, high learning speed, and absolute loyalty to the organization. Then, a couple of guards walked past the room, and with their whole appearance they began to show their contempt for the people in the test subjects' shirts. For them, they are, at best, insects on whom they first conducted a bunch of experiments and then sent to fight as cannon fodder. And with their brains washed, they haven't even been able to understand anything for a long time. They're just perfect slaves. And then one security guard decides to slightly pull his comrade back so that he would talk less about the samples. But he snorted that it was his personal business what and about whom to think. And again, in any case, all these creatures had their brains wiped clean. Zero looks down on these guards who think they are above other people. Absolutely all workers look at the samples as if they were simple cattle. However, some of the subjects are no better. For example, the first number is now mockingly patting Zero on the head. The guy is once again immersed in thoughts about the fact that for the embryo, they are just cannon fodder. The management probably doesn't even imagine that any of the subjects might start protesting. So Zero is very curious about the look on their faces when he destroys them. Sometime later, the laboratory received a call from the top of the organization. And finally, Wilson gets permission to open Zero for study. The man, with a crazy and satisfied smile, bows as if the interlocutor can see him. He waited for so long and now his request was heard. In the end, the boy is no longer of any use. There was also a shooting coach standing nearby, constantly twirling his favorite knife in his hands. After which he began to lament that this sample was an interesting toy, and he had not had time to play with it enough. Only Hel continued to stand silently, clenching her hand into a fist. Her face was full of sadness and regret. No matter what she did, Zero was never able to become useful enough for the organization. Without telling the guy anything, the girl began their daily training. But Zero noticed almost immediately that something was definitely wrong today. And as soon as he slowed down for a second thinking about it, the guy immediately gets hit in the stomach. Hel has never been known for her compassion or calm, but today she is overly aggressive. Meanwhile, the girl was yelling at him to try to counterattack or at least defend himself. But everything remained the same as in absolutely every previous training session. Time after time, Zero was hit by fists and heels and was unable to offer any resistance. And although the guy was already accustomed to daily beatings, today the girl's attacks were many times stronger. Coughing up blood, he was still trying to figure out where he had made a mistake that could have caused such a reaction in Hel. She continued to shout at him again that he was attacking her right now. Zero rises on shaking legs and somehow gets into a fighting stance. Usually he is given at least some respite, but today there is not a second of peace. The guy runs with all his might, trying to carry out a decent attack. He jumps and swings his arm to strike while Hel remains standing still. But Zero misses and doesn't even touch the girl's shoulder. She only had to tilt her head slightly. After which she grabs the guy by the hand, which was still stretched out in front of her. She pulls him sharply towards herself, continuing to scold him for hitting him too gently. After which he throws it aside, shouting in rage that this is all his desire to survive. Zero can do absolutely nothing and falls to the ground like a sack, leaving another dent beneath him. But the girl doesn't calm down and grabs him again, this time by the collar of his shirt. After which she is going to make another series of blows, a little more, and she will simply finish off the guy. Zero just looks at her. Now he doesn't have the strength, even for the sake of decency, to try to put up any resistance. The girl stops and gives him a look full of disappointment. After which she finally just throws it on the ground, laughing at herself for expecting anything. But then her voice becomes very quiet, almost trembling, as she announces that it is the end. Zero sits up slightly, asking why the training is over. Hel looks down and says that they will open it tomorrow. After which, absolutely devastated, without saying another word, she walks away. Only at the exit does she add that nothing more can be changed before the end. Zero watches her go, continuing to lie on the ground in his own blood. Now he understood why Hel had been so short-tempered today. She doesn't want to watch Wilson dig around in his head, and that's probably why she decided to bring him to a standstill herself. Hel was the only one who, during these 6 months, considered the guy a living being, a human being. Everyone else just made fun of him, because they were sure that the experimental specimen would not fight back. But he remembered every mockery, every drop of blood spilled, so now he is not going to just die. During the 6 months he spent in the warehouse, he managed to pass a huge amount of weapons through his hands. By this time, he has already gained enough experience to level up and receive a problematic task that stops the leveling process. Moreover, it turned out that Zero, unlike ordinary players, has no level limit, which means he can raise it to insane values. Now he is confident that the next stage in developing his mechanic skills will be creating gambling drawings. To obtain them, a fusion of knowledge is required, and sometimes it is impossible to predict what the outcome will be. But knowledge and experience points will be lost irretrievably. That is why this type of drawings is called gambling, and it seems that today, fortune is not on the hero's side. He frantically refreshed the page with the drawings, where again and again things that were useless to him appeared. And now, there are almost no resources left for creation, and the screen shines with bright light again. A couple of seconds, which for the guy were an eternity, and again before the guy's eyes was a message about a successful merger. It seems like Zero is about to break through the table. He finally got the drawing he needed. He quickly began to collect the thing that was a very important part of his escape plan. Less than an hour later, the system congratulated the guy on the successful assembly of a lightweight exoskeleton. Today, everyone at this base will learn what happens when you cultivate your own enemy. A single military helicopter was rapidly approaching the base. Hel and a group of test subjects, including number 1, were already waiting for him. A small group of soldiers with the call sign Owl descended from the helicopter. They receive orders to transport the Valkyrie samples, for which they use an SUV, and Hel takes their helicopter. The girl leaves the station every 2 months, but this time she was in a particular hurry and flew away early in the morning. This made it much easier for Zero to carry out his plans. Otherwise, he would have had a lot more difficulties. All the time, from the day he got to this base, the guy was preparing for this day. And today, he will finally leave this damned prison, having taken revenge on each of his tormentors. Today is the day Wilson is going to come for Zero, and this is his last and only chance. The guy was about to leave the room, But then his attention was caught by a photograph of Hell on the table. On it was the girl herself and her sister Aurora, who is her complete opposite. She can prolong life and even resurrect the dead. At the end of version 1.0, Embryo created a huge amount of healing essences from the girl's body, which enraged Hell, causing her to destroy everything in sight. A screen with a task appeared in front of the guy, which was activated after finding this photo. And since Hell had hoped for him, he decides to do something for her too and accepts this task. Suddenly, Wilson's voice came over the complex's public address system, calling Zero to his lab. The guy put the photo in his breast pocket, planning to deal with Aurora after his release. Before leaving the room, he carefully examined the corridor. As expected, the entire base was now under total surveillance. In such conditions, there is no chance to remain unnoticed. Therefore, the guy chooses the control point, the dispatcher's office, as his first target. Jumping over the stairs, Zero rushed to run straight down the corridor, and soon the coveted sign appeared in front of him, flashing with a blue light. Less than a minute passed before the entire room was filled with corpses, and those who still remained conscious could no longer offer any resistance at all. Now there is no one to track the guy's movements, so he moves on to his main target, Wilson. 20 minutes later, the lab reported the arrival of Sample Zero. He walked confidently into the room without saying a word. Wilson, holding a scalpel in his hands, greeted the guy he had been dreaming of dissecting all this time with a broad smile. Zero was held back by one guard, so he calmly listened as the scientist prepared to stuff him. The man turns back to the table with the tools, saying how many memories he has of the first successful sample. Literally a second passed, and behind Wilson there was a dull thud of a falling body. Wilson doesn't immediately understand what happened, but as soon as he turns around, his eyes widen in horror. This can't be. A brainwashed specimen can't kill people from the embryo. But here, in front of him, is the body of a security guard in a pool of blood, and he only turned around for a couple of seconds. And Zero smiled mockingly and put his hand to his forehead as if saluting and greeting a friend. Wilson, having calmed down a little, tries to understand what happened, because for all these 6 months the sample did not cause any problems. It was extremely stupid to stand and think in such a situation, because Zero had already swung his hand with a knife, on which the blood had not even dried yet. The man doesn't have time to say a word before a hoarse cry escapes from his throat. Now Zero has a madman's smile on his face as he continues to hit the scientist over and over again. Wilson's eyes are filled with fear. He doesn't understand what went wrong. Here he hopefully remembers the camera that was installed behind him. But the guy quickly disappoints the man by telling him that everyone in the control room is already dead. Wilson falls to his knees, holding onto the wall to try to cover the wound a little. But this is completely pointless. Nothing will help him now. All that was left for him was the bitter realization that all these 6 months Zero had only been pretending. The guy confirms that this is indeed the case. They were unable to clear his brain that day. The scientist, although he understands this, does not want to believe it. It is impossible he could not deceive absolutely everyone. Zero chuckled at the pitiful sight that now appeared before him. Finally, the moment he had longed for had arrived. The moment when he would take revenge for absolutely everything, for all the suffering he had to endure. Swinging the knife, instead of simply stabbing Wilson in the back, he cuts it completely, causing him maximum pain. Blood instantly begins to flow from all sides, causing the man to fall right into a pool of it. Realizing that this is the end, he turns his head with the last of his strength to look at Zero. He doesn't understand how the guy could do this to him, his creator. But in Zero's eyes, there is not a drop of pity or regret, only an icy thirst for revenge and contempt. The guy takes off the guard's clothes and takes a key card out of the scientist's pocket. With this pass, he can access all the doors in the complex. But if I just calmly go to the exit now, it would be suicide. That's exactly why Zero needed a security guard uniform, so as not to attract unnecessary attention to himself. The next step in the plan is to cut off communications so that the base has no way to report what happened. There were only a few people in the complex who could recognize the guy by sight, and 2 of them, Number 1 and Hell, had now left. Wilson is dead, and the rest of the base shouldn't even notice the guy. And then someone carefully put their hand on the guy's shoulder, asking which group he was from, and most importantly, who is he at all, because he has never been seen here before. Just when the guy thought that Bruce was the only one who could recognize him, there he was. But Zero had almost decided that he had already dealt with everything that could hinder him. Pulling his cap down over his eyes, he mumbled that he was new and from Group B. But of course, Bruce didn't believe it, because firstly, he hadn't been informed about the reinforcements of the fighters, and secondly, the guy's voice was painfully familiar to him. The man quickly pulled out a gun and demanded that the guy show his face. At this time, he was squeezing the handle of the knife, warning that he did not want to move to Plan B. Bruce was a little confused by this statement. For him, what he had just heard was some kind of nonsense. And then Zero turns around abruptly, raising the knife above his head and rushing at the man with a scream. The guy from their first meeting wanted to finally tell Bruce that he should check with a psychiatrist. The man covered himself from the blow with his hand and immediately remembered who this guy was. At this time, the guards remembered that they had to do something and prepared to shoot at the sample. But Zero had already calculated everything down to the split second long ago. In 2 seconds, he will be able to reach the machinery room, and Bruce will recover from the blow in 3 seconds. So the guy rushed forward, throwing aside everyone who got in his way. It might have seemed as if he was hovering above the ground, since he only lowered himself to push off for the jump. Zero is confident that in 4.5 seconds the guards won't have time to harm him, and reinforcements will arrive in 25 or 35 seconds. In one movement, the guy jumps into the room, the door to which was already half closed. A few more moments and it slams shut completely, isolating Zero from the guards. By this time, Bruce had already come to his senses and was even disappointed that the guy chose the stupidest option, to hide in the room. He walked slowly down the corridor towards the side where the door had just slammed, and suddenly there was a quiet roar with which a passage into the room opened. Rays of bright, warm light began to penetrate through the small crack. Bruce looks at this skeptically, not understanding what else this fool has decided to do. Meanwhile, the door continued to slowly open, beginning to reveal the source of light itself. At this point, the man realized that something was not right, and that the guy was not going to give up just like that. A bright light bursts out of the room, and all the surrounding people are thrown in different directions. All it took for Zero to do this was one punch from his exoskeleton-enhanced fist. Bruce is in a completely shocked state, having completely lost understanding of what is happening. And the guy prepares to strike, telling the man that he will die now. Once again, a simple punch gains monstrous power thanks to the hero's mechanism. Bruce can't believe that this weakling, this sissy, is now effortlessly throwing him into the wall. The guy was just starting to get a taste for it. He wouldn't calm down until he finished with this psycho who turned his clothes and body into rags every day. The man curls up and cannot resist. The only thing he can do now is try to understand how this could have happened at all. And Zero continues to strike with tripled fury and cruelty. And soon, Bruce is lying lifeless on the floor, his face frozen in amazement and shock. And the guy, whose face is covered in the man's blood, looks at him with the empty gaze of a real killer. After which he again clenches his hand into a fist, remembering everything that happened to him over the past 6 months. He remembered every blow, every one of the 420 that happened every day. And now Zero really wanted to hear what the man felt when he was overtaken by karma for all his atrocities. But there was no one to answer. Sirens wail and flash madly throughout the entire complex. All the newly arrived soldiers already know that the manager Bruce was killed. There is also no response from the control room, nor from Dr. Wilson. And then one of the guards announces that they were all killed too, causing everyone to feel real fear. Another support team soon arrives, the leader of which gives clear orders on where to look for the sample and what to do with the data from other experiments. But suddenly, a bright flash sparkles near the warehouse, followed by a monstrous roar. The room is filled with smoke, and the list of those killed seems to have grown by a few more people. Those who were in this area are hysterically trying to contact the group that was in that direction. But all the screams go into the void, because the radio lies next to the corpse of the squad leader. And then, Zero picks up the intercom from the floor, deciding that leaving the other side in silence would be too boring. The guy pretends to be a member of the group and says that part of their squad died from wounds, but they managed to shoot the sample. And as he needed, his interlocutor informs him that they are urgently moving in his direction. The guy had already managed to leave them a small surprise right at the entrance. As soon as the guards run into the room, they, without noticing, grab the taut rope, which makes her pull the pin from not just a grenade, but a whole block of explosives. Zero is now in a real frenzy, smiling inappropriately as he runs away from the explosion. Meanwhile, the group that was in the warehouse feels the effects of the explosion even more clearly. Now they are not only deafened by the noise, but they are also starting to be covered in debris. Absolutely everyone starts to panic. No one can understand why something explodes so often. The squad leader tries his best to maintain his composure and continues to give orders. And he was already about to set off in search of the sample with some of his people. But another devilish thing happens. Zero, who came from nowhere and who knows how he opens the gates. Meanwhile, the guy laughs again artificially and says goodbye to everyone present. After which he jumps out into the street and locks the gate from the outside using that same keycard. This way, he was able to avoid pursuit and, in addition, locked the soldiers, not allowing them to leave the base at all. Zero stands on the first cobblestone he comes across and enthusiastically spreads his arms out to the side. He breathes in the fresh air with pleasure and exposes his face to the warm rays of the sun. Meanwhile, the people who were locked in the base still manage to convey a message to the leadership. Hell can't believe what she heard, and, as if hoping that the guy would hear her, asks him to come back. After which the girl drops her hands helplessly, remembering the conversation about her sister. She has no chance of getting the right to an additional meeting. But there is nothing to be done, and with a heavy heart, she orders them to turn back. It was approaching midnight, and only a few lanterns illuminated the road. The car could no longer go any further, so its crew decided to continue the search on foot. After all, there was no way the specimen could have traveled a long distance in such a short period of time. One of the soldiers begins to complain that the entire Sova group was brought in for this sample. The second one replies that on the contrary, they should be happy, because it's been a long time since they've been given any tasks at all. The sounds of cars and camp arrangements began to spread throughout the area. Zero sat under a tree, estimating how many cars had been sent after him. He was sure that under the cover of night, he would not be easily discovered, especially in the forest. But it was not to be, because right at that moment, a bullet flies past his shoulder and hits a tree. Although the projectile did not hit the target exactly, the guy received a noticeable injury and realized that he urgently needed to reduce the distance between himself and his opponents. Dodging bullets, he rushes from one tree to another, trying to come up with some kind of plan of action. And then, through the thicket of the forest, something glowing flies like a spark. The projectiles become larger and larger, and this time they hit the exoskeleton, threatening to break it. The guy begins to maneuver even more desperately between the trees, trying to catch the right moment to attack. The sniper is shocked when, in just a couple of seconds, his own target appears right next to him. He quickly pulls a small pistol from his belt, which will now be more useful than a rifle. But Zero, with an icy expression on his face, dodges every shot, after which he sends the unfortunate man flying with the help of his still-working modified hand. The sniper crashes into a tree with insane force, having no chance of survival, after which the guy approaches him to take the ammunition for himself. Immediately, a system notification appears in front of him about a victory over a high-class opponent. Other soldiers, seeing the death of their comrade, begin to fire non-stop in all directions, hoping to at least hit the sample. But he decides to use the grenade he just got from the corpse. Zero throws it at the attackers with a running start, getting rid of the crowd of people at once. Notifications of victory begin to appear in front of him one by one. Meanwhile, the survivors begin throwing grenades back, wanting revenge. And then the guy disappears completely from sight behind a veil of fire and smoke. The soldiers had already breathed a sigh of relief, deciding that they had finally gotten rid of their target. But everything was not so, and at that very moment, they themselves were about to be incinerated. Those who notice a bright light next to them freeze in fear. The unit commander shouts for everyone to run away, and he himself does it first. And Zero, with a grin, counts how many more he managed to kill in these half a minute. The entire forest clearing was covered in blood and full of people on the verge of death and already dead. Many of them could not believe what had happened, because a simple specimen could not have pulled off such a trick, especially the squad leader, who was now unsuccessfully trying to stop the bleeding from his wound. Standing up, he again looked around the entire clearing, which was full of the corpses of his subordinates. He is filled with rage and anger. He cannot believe that his entire squad was destroyed so easily. But he won't let it go. He'll make Zero realize that he killed the wrong people today. The guy looks at his stats with concern. He has little defense left, so he needs to end the battle quickly. Just as he was thinking about this, he noticed someone running towards him. The detachment commander, driven by a thirst for revenge, rushed into the attack with the last of his strength. The man desperately swings his knife, hoping to hit the guy or completely break his exoskeleton. But Zero reacts instantly and shortens from the blow, crouching, after which he presses his foot into the ground, apparently intending to repeat one of Hell's techniques. The guy jumps and knocks his opponent off his feet and makes him fall, after which, with a kick, he knocks the man into the ground, completely immobilizing him. But he is not going to give up so easily, even despite the wounds he has already received. The commander himself uses his legs in the fight and kicks the guy in the stomach, throwing him off himself. Zero didn't expect such resistance, and besides, he was already quite tired. The man leans back, trying to get up from the ground. It's a miracle that he can fight after all this, after which he clenches his hand into a fist and hits the ground with all his might. Because he underestimated Zero, all his guys died, and it was all his fault. Therefore, the commander will not be able to live peacefully in this world. This burden will forever remain a stone on his soul. But before that, he intends to send this monster straight to hell with his own hands. The man continues to desperately throw himself at the guy over and over again. He had no other weapon than a knife, but he didn't care about it. Zero had to work hard to repel this attack, once again exposing his exoprosthesis to the blow. It begins to sparkle and crackle, but still withstands the attack. The man fails to penetrate the armor and simply loses the knife, which becomes stuck in it. The commander is in complete despair, because now he doesn't have a single chance. Meanwhile, Zero continues to use the exoskeleton, despite how badly damaged it is. And with all his might, he punches the man in the face. He falls to the ground, but manages to grab part of the mechanical arm, causing it to begin to fall apart. The guy steps on his opponent and tries to catch his breath after such a strong blow. Even though the exoskeleton fell apart, he now has a blueprint. All that remains is to find the materials. Well, now he just needs to run wherever his eyes look, because the next reinforcements from the embryo will arrive soon. At the same time, there was absolute anarchy in the main hall of the base. The head of the organization was furious that just one failed experimental sample was able to kill 30 guards, the Special Forces Unit Owl, Wilson, and all the laboratory data. And in the end, he was able to escape completely safe and sound. The surviving workers tried to justify themselves by saying that they could not predict the side effects of the Valkyrie serum. And it seems that the brainwashing did not work on him, which allowed him to develop an escape plan. But Hell has a different opinion. She doesn't believe that Zero could become so strong so quickly. Perhaps he awakened some special abilities. The leader interrupted this reasoning by stating that there would be no more samples until they eliminated the serum anomalies and ordered the brain wipe of all those who had already been processed. The first number, who was also present in the room, began to be indignant that his loyalty was being questioned. So he steps up with a group of his comrades and volunteers to lead the squad to capture Zero. The head gives the go-ahead for such actions and orders the sample to be brought to the base, alive or dead. During all his wanderings, Zero was able to go quite far, deep into the forest, moving at random. If you look closely, you can see a thin stream of smoke from the place where he decided to make camp. Having caught a small bird, he roasted over a fire since 7 days after the escape, food and water ran out. Luckily for the guy, his wounds are gradually healing and are not inflamed, as his stamina points are making themselves felt. Soon, the bird is fully cooked, and with a soft click, he tears off its leg. Zero quickly absorbs it, wondering when he will finally be able to get out of the thicket. After a short rest, he sets off on his way again, but suddenly stumbles over something. The guy immediately notices a suspicious sound and feels that he clearly didn't hit a twig. In a second, a large net, like one used to catch a bear, falls from one of the trees onto him. The owner of this trap is watching him nearby with a grin. After which, threatening with a gun, he orders the guy not to move and not to resist. Pointing his gun, he demands that they hand over everything he has in his backpack. Zero looks at him with disdain, not answering. The robber begins to get furious that his words are being ignored. And suddenly, the guy grabs him by the throat, reaching his hand through the mesh, which was very large. With his other hand, he punches the thief and breaks some of the ropes that were entangling him. The robber clearly did not expect such a turn of events and could not do anything at all. Blood gushed from his mouth and he coughed hoarsely from the multiple blows, after which he falls to his knees, beginning to beg Zero for forgiveness and mercy. Meanwhile, the guy looks at his gun with displeasure, which is so crooked that it is easier to hit himself in the head when shooting. The thief continues to beg for forgiveness, agreeing with his guilt at every word. Zero already found it funny that he was asking what this guy was guilty of. He was silent for a while, his head bowed, trying to find the words, after which he timidly suggested that he should have taken a second gun, which made Zero laugh even harder. And as soon as he removed the barrel of the gun from the thief's forehead, he crawled to the side, saying that this was what he knew how to do best. But the guy grabbed him by the cloak and pulled him sharply towards himself. It's somehow unfair that he caught him, tried to take everything that was with him, and now he just leaves. Therefore, Zero demands to know where the nearest city is, to which the thief begins to tell with tears in his eyes, interrupting himself with pleas to let him go. The guy, who is already pretty fed up with this whining, swings his fist. The robber closes his eyes and, as much as possible in his condition, curls up into a ball. But suddenly, Zero unclenches his hand, leaving only a couple of fingers bent. And instead of a strong blow, he just lightly hits the guy on the forehead, to which he still starts screaming, after which he closes his eyes again, not knowing what else to expect from this madman. But no further action followed in his direction, not even a word. Zero simply laughed, saying that he wasn't that strong, and then sent the thief away. Soon our hero comes to a camp of vagabonds, consisting of several SUVs and a couple of tents. He had barely entered it when one of the merchants immediately noticed him. The trunk of his car was full of various goods, and he also makes a living by bartering. For Zero, this is an ideal option, because he doesn't have any money on him, but his backpack is full. From it, he pulls out a handful of bullets, wanting to exchange them for a map, water, and food. The merchant looks at the offered goods for a while in bewilderment, after which he disappointingly declares that this is not enough at all, he needs 150 rounds. Zero is indignant that this is too high a price, but the merchant, completely confident in his rightness, reminds him that there is no other camp nearby. and suddenly someone from behind hits him on the head with a pipe, calming his insolence. The young man demands that they stop deceiving people. It is already difficult for people to live in the forests. The merchant looks at him angrily, hissing that he almost came to an agreement, and Zero already begins to hide the bag of cartridges back. Meanwhile, the hero of justice turns to Zero, offering to spend the night in the camp today and promising to prepare everything he wanted to take for free by the evening. The guy briefly thanks his benefactor. Finally, he met a man who doesn't look like a scoundrel. So the new comrade takes him to his tent, inviting him to have lunch. There they are, immediately met by the man's wife, Anne, who immediately brings them water, after which she greeted her husband's guest, Lloyd, with a smile. She lays out a lot of dishes on the table, hoping that he will like something, and also offers to spend the night with them. Zero hadn't eaten properly for 3 days, so his eyes immediately lit up, and he thanked his mistress many times. The guy began to devour everything in sight, melting in admiration for the taste of the dishes and seeing a bunch of messages about his improved health. It was already approaching midnight, and active conversation continued in the tent. Lloyd was telling the story of his gun, and the boy was listening attentively. He soon learns that the man's homeland was long ago absorbed by another large country. Well, his wife cleaned up and washed the dishes, sometimes briefly joining in their conversation. The next day, early in the morning, Zero was already ready to set out. Thanking Lloyd for the warm welcome, he notices the familiar face of the thief in the car and asks who he is to the man. It turned out that it was his nephew, whom he had taken in, and yesterday he had returned very late, which is why he had slept in the car. Zero smiled slightly, knowing the reason for it, and then said goodbye to the man, expressing his hope to meet again. Lloyd hoped so too, reminding them that next time they were obliged to drink a bottle. Probably no more than an hour had passed when several armed SUVs approached the base. This is the only camp within a 50-kilometer radius, so they are sure that Zero was here. They called out to the men, who were busy sorting out supplies at the time, after which the first sample showed them a photo of the guy, asking if they had seen him. The situation was getting more and more tense with each passing minute. Lloyd answered the same thing over and over again, that no one from their camp had seen anyone like him. The soldiers were already starting to get angry that they were wasting their time and apparently had really gone in the wrong direction. But the first sample was not going to give up so easily and was confident in his rightness. Here he noticed a young boy who had been standing to the side the entire time of the interrogation, hiding his eyes. Having decided that they will finally be able to get the necessary information out of him, he gives the order for his arrest. And since this young man was also hiding his hands, they decided to search him. The thief showed with his whole appearance that he was hiding something, because with each passing second, he began to shake more and more with fear. The first sample points the barrel of the gun that was just taken from him at him. It turned out that this was the gun that Zero stole from the Owl Squad. And where could it have come from if the guy hadn't come here? Pointing the gun at the thief, the first one once again demanded an answer. Otherwise, absolutely everyone who is currently in the camp will die today. The merchant standing behind the boy raised his hands in fear and looked sideways at Lloyd, after which he begged him to tell the truth about how he hid Zero in his tent. The first sample turned the barrel towards him, realizing that he knew everything they needed. The man closes his eyes as if struggling with himself or trying to find the words. Afterwards, without making a sound, he simply pointed in the direction where Zero had gone. The first one grinned contentedly and didn't understand why he couldn't tell right away, but he didn't take his finger off the trigger, clearly seeing that they were trying to fool him again. There was a roar, and crowds of frightened birds took flight from all around. At this time, Zero was sitting somewhere in the depths of the forest on a rock, taking a short break. Suddenly, he felt a strange feeling of anxiety, so much so that his eyes started twitching. The guy started to double-check his backpack and realized that someone had opened it. And suddenly, a chill ran down his spine. It turned out that one of the pistols was missing, and apparently because of this, Lloyd's nephew was so nervous. The entire ground in the camp was covered in blood, here and there smeared with fresh tracks from vehicles. Zero froze in fear as this terrifying picture spread out before his eyes. There was not a single living soul at the base, only a pile of dead bodies. Absolutely everyone with whom he had communicated just a couple of hours ago, died. The boy clenches his fists in impotent rage and grief. Suddenly, someone touched his leg, hoarsely, and ate, audibly whispering a request not to leave. Hearing the familiar voice, Zero turns around with a disdainful face, but his eyes are full of sadness. The merchant screams with all his might that it was the embryo squad that was looking for him. None of them turned in the guy, and for that they were all killed. So the man tearfully begged Zero on behalf of Lloyd to avenge them all. The boy was called by what he heard and closed his eyes, collecting his thoughts. Then another weak voice was heard, asking him not to believe the man. The thief said that it was the merchant who turned in Uncle Lloyd, and he stood his ground until his last breath and didn't give anything away. Zero turned around and saw with horror the mutilated corpse of his comrade who had been so kind to him. His heart skipped a beat and the boy fell to his knees in front of him. Lloyd's hand was frozen forever in a pointing gesture, pointing in the exact opposite direction from where Zero had gone. The boy threw off his cape and covered the corpse, unable to look at it. After which he went to the merchant, who suddenly found the strength to actively beg him to stop. But Zero silently reloaded his pistol, not wanting to listen to any more pathetic excuses and more lies. Lloyd never gave him up until his death, a guy he had known for no more than 2 days. A real man died because of such a pathetic weakling who always thinks only about personal gain. So the guy confidently pointed the gun at him, wishing him to apologize to Lloyd in the next world. After the massacre, Zero began searching the camp to prepare for an ambush. The path that the squad was shown leads to nowhere, which means they will soon return back. A system notification sounded next to him about a new task. This time his class was Revenge, and to complete the mission he had to destroy a squad of specimens. Zero dumped all the weapons he had on the table and got to work. Using his mechanical skills, he began to take each one apart, after which he began to improve the parts and combine everything into more powerful guns. And so he got one barrel, but of a much higher class than what he had initially. With its help, the guy will make absolutely everyone regret what they did. Once again, he had to wait until nightfall to take action. Zero, sitting among the trees, carefully watched the approaching armored vehicles. Meanwhile, the first sample was looking out of the window, trying to spot its target. And suddenly, at the end of the convoy, a monstrous roar was heard. Panic began in the transport where the sample squad was, because it looked like a car explosion. The first one immediately suspected whose handiwork this was, and that it was an attack, since low-pressure tires cannot burst just like that. He ordered the group to move behind the armored tanks, and after approaching the target, to transfer to jeeps. Zero, who had already moved to another point, grinned at this order. The plan was certainly correct, and that was the only reason it was easy to guess that everything was like this. Another series of explosions thundered, causing the cars to fall off the cliff. The armored vehicles broke in half as if they were made of cardboard. Some of the crew were immediately injured, while others were seriously injured and tried to escape from the wreckage. But this was a fatal mistake, because everyone who emerged from the tank was immediately riddled with dozens of bullets. And soon the entire clearing was covered in blood and strewn with corpses. The first specimen, seeing what was happening, got out of the car and made a sharp jump to hide, after which, sitting behind a rock, he demanded that the attacker show himself. And then his eyes froze in horror. He could not believe that this man had arranged all this alone. Zero was looking at him, his gun at the ready, almost burning with anger. The first one still didn't believe it, because he personally, back at the base, saw what a weakling he was. The guy grinned at this phrase. He had heard it so many times already. But everyone who said this is already 2 meters underground. Suddenly, a loud voice came from the radio that the first one had dropped. The head of the organization himself demanded that Zero return, promising to preserve his memory and receive a high rank. Otherwise, the world will no longer be big for him, and certainly not safe, because the embryo has roots absolutely everywhere. The guy laughed at the blind confidence of those around him and his naivety, after which he briefly and clearly stated that he would destroy them all. Having said this, Zero returned to his original task and literally tore the first sample into pieces with one shot. The system displayed a message about the victory over the Valkyrie sample and the completion of the revenge mission. All this, of course, gave a lot of experience points, but in any case, Zero is still weak, so now he will go to the Star Dragon Empire. Before finally leaving the camp, the guy finished his last task. He buried Lloyd, because this is the last thing he can do to thank him for everything he did. The train rushes quickly across the bridge, along the mountain slopes. One of the cars was filled with a pile of hay and many domestic chickens. Zero, who decided to refresh his knowledge of the structure of this world, was comfortably located among them. It turned out that he now needed to complete a factional task related to the organization with which he was developing relations. And in his case, to complete it, it is necessary to destroy the embryo by 20%. No matter how professional a player he is, he can't handle this one alone. But there is nothing to be done, because without this task it is impossible to develop further, so the guy accepts it. Soon he gets off the train and approaches the western capital of the Star Dragon Empire. Embryo has probably already passed on information about his search to everyone, so it will most likely not be possible to pass the checkpoint. But of course, this little thing will not stop our hero on the way to his goal. In his past life, he had already met players from the Red List who were also stuck in this area. But this lasted only until the moment when they found the hidden NPC smuggler. For money, he could smuggle absolutely anyone into the city. Zero, coming to him, threw a bag of weapons, intending to pay in this way. The man grimaced with displeasure as if looking at the guy in condemnation. After which, without further ado, he went to his van, lifting the awning so that the guy could crawl through. Currently, the Star Dragon Empire is quite weak among the Six Nations and is at odds with the Embryo. The city where the guy arrived was absolutely identical to the one in other versions, so Zero went to a hidden plot point, the workshop. It would be foolish to miss the opportunity to use the chance to apply there, since there is no one to compete with the guy in skill. Entering the building, he immediately finds the person he needs, who was very busy at the moment. One man, screaming furiously, placed a black stone on the board. The second, with no less excitement, held a white circle between his fingers. Perhaps only these two could play Go so intensely that even Zero was temporarily stunned while watching the battle. But then he took a closer look at the situation on the board itself. It turned out that each of them had no more than 5 stones lined up in a row, and the noise was as if a fight was being waged for every millimeter of the field. Suddenly, someone called out to the guy, distracting him from his disappointment at what he saw. It was a little girl with a bow that looked like bunny ears who asked him if there was anything that needed fixing. The guy was a little skeptical about the fact that there was a girl working there, but he couldn't help but notice that she was quite cute. Finally, our hero decides to interrupt the battle by asking if they accept students here. Without waiting for the men to answer, the girl herself answers him that everything is correct. They are taking newcomers. She comes up to the guy and takes him by the shoulder, offering to go into another room and not freeze, and he is in shock, because a little more and he will get sunstroke. And the girl hands him a broken mobile terminal, saying that it is for testing. If he manages to fix it, the guy is immediately accepted into their team. But then the man finally spoke up, indignant that everything was being decided for him. He irritably decides to ask Zero why he decided to become a student at all. The guy immediately starts to panic that he might have been recognized, and with difficulty says that he is simply looking for a job. The girl puts her hand on his shoulder encouragingly and asks her grandfather not to scare him. Otherwise, she herself cannot cope with such an amount of work. The man snorts in irritation and throws the Go Stone back into the jar, after which he suddenly gets up from the table, causing Zero great concern. It turned out that he is the owner of the workshop, and therefore it is up to him to decide what the test task will be. The guy is already tired of this confusion and asks what he needs to do then. The master smiles at the fact that the newcomer doesn't seem to be a coward and begins to explain. The guy has to create a prosthetic arm for his friend in 3 hours, and if he likes it, he gets hired. This friend's face seemed very familiar to Zero, but he couldn't remember where he had seen it. Here the girl begins to get indignant, because just one drawing can take several hours. The man asks Leia not to interfere, as the guy needs to show something worthwhile, and if he is afraid, then let him leave immediately. Zero smiled slyly, realizing that he had a chance to show off his skills, after which, full of confidence, he declares that he will do this, causing Leia complete shock. And so the guy is brought into the workshop, given complete freedom of action. The girl herself already wants to find out what Zero has planned and offers to help him with the drawing. But he claims that there is no need for this, since he has already thought everything through in his head. Leia looks on in admiration, not believing that it is really possible to understand and imagine such a complex mechanism in 2 minutes. Then the owner of the workshop came up and told the guy to stop bragging and get down to business. The man is a professional mechanic, and even for him it is impossible to come up with a drawing in a couple of minutes. But Zero intends to show that he doesn't just throw words to the wind. Soon the entire workshop is filled with the noise and rumble of working equipment. The man is still trying to figure out what this self-confident young man was up to. The prosthesis in his hands is already starting to take shape, and the guy hasn't done a single unnecessary action during the entire time. Looking at the pile of blanks for the rest of the mechanism parts, he still can't believe that all of this could really be thought up in his head in such a short time. Unable to contain himself, he lets out an admiring cry, and Leia asks her grandfather not to distract Zero from his work. The boy's hands quickly assembled the prosthesis from small parts, as if he had been doing this all his life. Soon he turned around and said with a satisfied smile that everything was ready, holding the assembled prosthesis in his hands. The grandfather asked in shock if everything was ready, and the girl was surprised that he had completed the work in 2.5 hours. Zero placed the prosthesis on the man's hand, asking him to try it on and how it felt. The man moved his mechanical arm and said it moved like a real arm. He added that the prosthesis is smooth and does not rub the skin at all, and concluded that he really likes it. Zero was pleased with the assessment and said that if so, he could take it, and the man replied that then he would owe him. Grandpa angrily said that these were his materials, so he owed him and was indignant that he didn't even ask permission. Zero said with a smile that he would then ask now if he was skilled enough to stay here. Grandfather replied that he could stay because he was interested in how long he could last. Zero was happy because now he had a place to live, and sooner or later he would definitely get his blueprints. The man turned to the grandfather, calling him Buddy, and said that they would see each other soon. and the grandfather replied that he should not come back. The boy thought that here he would be able to level up faster and have a good rest. An employee was already waiting for the man at the car and helpfully opened the door for him. He handed the man the phone and said that he was being called, and he answered immediately. Sitting in the car, he said to pass on to intelligence the wanted Zero had infiltrated the Western capital. In the 13th Division of the Star Dragon Defense Headquarters, two people discussed that Zero had infiltrated the Western capital to seek refuge. The man said that Embryo had announced a large reward for him, which meant that he was either a genius or extremely capable, which meant he had to be prepared for any outcome. He ordered the monitoring team to intercept all communications mentioning Zero's location. And our hero had no idea that he had already been discovered a long time ago and had come to the cloud dump in the 7th District. Leopard, the head of the gray zone of the 7th District, asked him who he was and why he was looking for a meeting. With a gun in his hand, Zero said it didn't matter who he was, adding that the man wouldn't mind working with him, and the guard screamed when he managed to steal the gun. While dismantling the weapons, he said that the arms trade was profitable these days and he could help cut costs, and in return, he would only ask for a small reward. The man asked in surprise if he could really make guns. He put the cigar in the ashtray and told me to tell him what kind of cooperation he had in mind. Zero said he would provide a list later. They would provide materials and parts, the boy would provide production and assembly, and he would work 2 hours a day. $230 for each gun, and the kid can take any mechanical junk. The man replied that all the materials here belonged to him, and he could only pay $150. As if expecting such an answer, Zero headed towards the exit without saying a word. The man soon changed his mind and nodded that he agreed to his price, and the boy replied that he would return tomorrow, and in the meantime, they had to prepare the equipment. While poking around in the dump, Zero thought that producing mechanisms costs money, although he shouldn't worry about it now, because the 13th Division will easily guess that he works for Leopard. He understood that since they knew what a talented mechanic he was, they would come for him sooner or later. When the sun was already setting and purple reflections appeared in the sky, the boy returned to the workshop. Leia asked where he had disappeared to, since he had been gone for a long time, to which Zero replied that he had been rummaging through the dump. The girl said with concern that this place was very dangerous and asked not to go there too often. Zero did not argue and agreed, and Leia, satisfied with the answer, asked him to wash his hands and go down to dinner. While the boy was washing his hands, he thought that in order to complete the level up quest, he needed to master 5 bases. And he still doesn't have a weapon base and basic materials. The old man definitely has the whole collection, and Zero decided that he needs to get them. Sitting down at the table, the boy asked if he could borrow the old man's books on mechanics, but he immediately refused. Buggy angrily said that he didn't have any books for Zero. The boy, smiling, suggested thinking of it as an investment in youth and training of workers. The old man said that he was even more impudent than he thought, and added that he would not give him the books in any case. Then Leia came up and said with a smile that Grandpa was joking, and there was nothing special about it, handing Zero a stack of books. The old man lost his temper and shouted whose granddaughter she was, and Zero thanked the girl. He opened the information window and pressed the yes button when asked to invest points in training. Zero studied the books with a smile and gained new skills after each reading. He thought that in a fight with the embryo, using others was a normal thing, but he needed to prepare. And at this time, outside the window, someone in a raincoat and hat reported that the target had been discovered. The night passed without incident, and soon another working morning arrived. Leia stretched and complained that it was very hot today, which was why things were not going well at all. She asked Zero what he was doing, and the guy replied that he was building a robot, just for fun. The girl admired him, saying that he was very hardworking. That was why he was so good. The man interrupted their conversation and asked if this was a workshop. Leia approached him and asked what happened. The man said that his car broke down, to which she replied that it was not a problem. The man said the engine was very dirty and asked why the boy didn't do it. Zero quickly glanced at him and noticed that the man was clearly trained, most likely from the 13th Division. Leia was outraged that this seemed like a stereotype, but the boy calmed her down and suggested that they take a break. The man took the boy to the place where his car was parked and pointed to a black car. He tried to start a conversation and asked Zero with a smile. He is still young, but the boy didn't really want to make contact and, opening the hood, said that he was already 30. The man asked his name, to which Zero replied that he should introduce himself first to show his respect. He began to get a little irritated by this manner of speech, but still answered that his name was June. Zero continued to repair the car and said it was a good name. But he immediately added that he had misunderstood him and said that he was waiting for a cigarette. Jun looked nervously at the boy, trying to figure out whether he was joking or not, but he offered him a cigarette. After lighting a cigarette, the boy said he could call him Hank. The man smiled nervously and asked Hank if he was not from around here. He asked where the guy was from, but he just closed the hood and said that everything was ready. Zero said he had a broken hydraulic pipe and it was $9. June, still nervous, said that Hank was quite capable and asked where he had studied, to which the boy replied that he was self-taught. The man reached into his pocket for money and, saying that it was impressive, asked again where he was from. Zero said he was from the village and, pretending to be a fool, asked if the man expected a discount. The boy snatched the money and said that the man's wallet was in the deepest pocket he had ever seen. Jun got into the car and drove off, and Zero stood still watching him. Sitting in the car, the man said that their preliminary target was a mechanic whose danger had not been determined, and his name was Hank. The speaker asked the man what the target's personality analysis was, and he replied that it was very rude. Leia saw off the next guests, thanking them for coming. She approached Zero, who was busy with the drawings, and said that there were more and more visitors. Soon it would be possible to expand, and several visitors were constantly asking about him. Zero said that he just does his job and doesn't try to sell unnecessary things, which is why customers like him. The girl tilted her head to the side and thoughtfully said that they were all men. Suddenly, she blushed and said that there was no need to worry, she would not treat him differently, and Zira said that it was not what she thought. He said with displeasure that girls are crazy these days. The boy looked into the box of parts and thought that the last part of the Ranger was ready. He began to collect the parts slowly so as not to miss anything. And there in front of him stood a small robot, a little over a meter in height. Zero liked the result of the work and said that he would name it Roger 10. Suddenly, he saw a message about a new mission where he had to escape and thought that perhaps this was planned by the 13th Division to test Zero's strength. The sun was already setting, painting the city orange. Zero told Leia that he had to go somewhere and that he was taking the day off today. Looking at the guy's dressed-up face, Leia asked excitedly if he had any problems. She stood in front of Zero and said that she could help. But the guy replied that everything was fine and asked the girl not to worry. Several mercenaries watching the boy asked in surprise if this brat was really worth $1 million. And the men from the car were watching them, and one reported that the stinging bee squad was pursuing the target. Zero went to the junkyard, believing that if they fought in the city, the common people might get hurt. The guy walked into the building and said he came for materials, and Leopard invited him to dinner. Zero accepted the invitation and only smiled slyly in response. The Leopard said that he spent a lot of money to find out where the hero came from. And I didn't expect to find out that he was an ordinary wanderer who had just arrived in the western capital. With a bored look on his face, the guy asked if he thought his source might be lying. The Leopard warned the boy to tell everything he knew about the weapon for his own safety. He added that he hoped for cooperation, or he would have to force the information out. Zero looked at the man confidently and asked if he was sure he could handle him. The Leopard replied that he was just a wanderer. What could he do to him? The boy said that his source had incorrect information and suggested opening the darknet and seeing how much the price was for his head. In response, the man said that he had been bluffed like this more than once before, and the last one did not even receive a funeral. Zero put his hand in the backpack and asked what was going on, and that was the end of their conversation. The next moment, someone put a gun to the guy's head, but he just smiled. A prosthetic appeared in Zero's hand, and he suddenly jumped up, confusing the bandits. The robotic arm glowed blue as the boy pointed it at the bandits. Several blue flashes erupted from the hand, piercing the attackers. The Leopard was very surprised by the strange weapon and asked what it was. The man screamed for everyone outside to run to him and kill Zero. The bandits wondered why they all had to run there to deal with one brat. But they didn't have time to run, as they were pierced by blue beams from Zero's weapon. Zero was delighted with his success, and did not notice that mercenaries from the stinging bee squad were approaching him. The boy blew up the building and ran from there, looking back at the explosion. Several bullets flew past Zero, and the mercenaries moved closer to him in an organized manner. They decided to surround the guy, Group A approaching directly, and Group B going around him from behind. Suddenly, someone shouted that the target had been detected, taking our hero by surprise. He managed to change location and fire several rounds in response to the shots. Zero managed to distract the mercenaries with shots, and he immediately rushed to another place. The Leopard's gang couldn't figure out where the mercenaries came from, but the man guessed that they came for the boy. Having found a new hiding place, the boy looked around and put his hand in his pocket. He took a colorful gamepad out of his pocket and opened it, and on the screen was a robot. Sitting down more comfortably, Zero picked up the gamepad and thought with a grin that he was ready for this. The Robot Ranger 10 drove out to the mercenaries and opened fire on them. The mercenaries were surprised by the appearance of the robot and immediately decided to open fire and destroy it. It seemed that for the Ranger, the 10 from the bullet was harmless and did no harm. Zero watched the robot's condition on the gamepad screen and realized that he couldn't take it anymore and he had to finish them off. The mercenaries focused on the robot, and Leopard decided to take advantage of the situation and attack Zero. The boy grinned evilly and, thinking that they had fallen for the trick, set the robot to self-destruct. The boy huddled and covered his head with his hands, waiting for the explosion. One of the mercenaries shouted to stop because something was wrong with the robot, but it was already too late, and a powerful explosion scattered the mercenaries in different directions. The Leopard was shocked that Zero blew him up right in the city and called the guy crazy. The men sitting in the car cursed angrily when they heard the explosion. Jun got out of the car to look at the explosion and said that the authorities asked to do everything quietly and ordered to get out of there. Men appeared at the scene of the skirmish and ordered everyone to stand still because they were from the 13th Division. The mercenaries obediently raised their hands. But Leopard and his gang did not believe that the 13th Division was here. Suddenly, the Leopard remembered Zero's words about the $1 million reward and thought that he couldn't have been telling the truth. The man took the laptop and quickly found confirmation that there was $1 million for Zero's head because he was a deserter from the embryo. Not believing his eyes, the man smashed the laptop and said he had had enough. The 13th Division continued to handcuff the mercenaries. Nearby, one mercenary was helping another to stand up, and a soldier shouted at them not to move. At this time, Zero was thinking that the whole operation had gone down the drain because of the mercenaries. Thinking that he couldn't let the 13th Division steal his skills, Zero opened fire on the mercenaries. The soldier ordered the boy to put down his weapon, but he only smiled, because thanks to these shots, he completed his next task, to kill all the mercenaries. Soon, our hero was taken to the interrogation room of the 13th Division. Jun introduced himself as an intelligence officer of the Star Dragon and reminded that they had met before. Zero smiled and said that he remembered him as a man with a very deep wallet. The second man, wearing glasses, seriously told the boy to stop joking. He ordered him to explain why the embryo had put a price on his head and added that he should provide all the information. The guy said he was very scary and added that if they wanted to cooperate, they should invite someone more competent. Zero added with a smile that they were not at all competent. A voice came from the speakers. The man said that he was the chief of intelligence, and the boy replied that he would do. The man asked if he was a member of the embryo. Zero replied that he was, and when asked about his position, he said he was a logistician. The boss said that Embryon would not charge $1 million for a logistician, and threateningly said that they could get him to talk. Suddenly, Zero began to extract data from the log, a message whose contents were classified. The boss stared at the boy in shock, digesting what he had heard. The men looked at each other in confusion. The meaning of this message was unclear to them. But the boss understood everything and seriously asked if he was sure of the data. Zero said that if he hadn't seen the message, how would he have known this? And he thought that this information was still a big secret according to the game's plot. He thought that if Embryo contacted Darkstar, the others would be in trouble, so he would easily get the Star Dragon's attention. Zero asked if they could now move on to discussing cooperation. Circled the locations, Zero said that these were the Embryo's 3 secret bases, and this data was his respect for cooperation. The boss asked if he only knew about 3, Zero replied that no, but for now they needed to check these 3. The man asked what his conditions were, and the guy replied that he just wanted to work on the embryo case. He replied that he needed to report the conversation to his superiors and added that the guy would have to wait here. The men discussed cooperation. One said that Hank could be trusted, and the other shouted that this could not be done. The gray-haired man said that he insisted on being able to shake all the data out of Zero without cooperation, and the boss replied that this was nonsense, and they couldn't push away someone who had proven his honesty. The man shouted that he was acting like a coward, and the other replied that he was thinking unreasonably. The director said that they could cooperate with him, and it would be extremely useful for the 13th Division. The gray-haired man had to agree with the director. He suggested sending him to the logistics department, where he would not be able to go out, and they could keep an eye on him. The director said that they would benefit either way, and added that it would be better to send him to the covert operations department. At this time in the laboratory, the guy was studying Zero's hand, and was surprised at who made it. The gray-haired man asked the boy whether he could break this arm or not. The guy boasted that there was nothing special about it, and that the one who made it was a redneck. The gray-haired man asked if he had done anything better, or if he thought his sticky bomb was better than this hand. The boy blushed when the man remembered the fake breasts that shoot poisoned needles, which sent several soldiers to the hospital. At this time, the boss said on the phone that he would make sure that Hank got into the covert operations department. He asked if the boy was really worth all the effort, to which the man replied that he had a feeling that Zero would help in the fight against the embryo. After some time, the action moved to an abandoned area. The military equipment rushed forward, and the commander gave a speech, calling on the soldiers to destroy the Embryon base. The embryo soldiers fought off the attack, wondering how the Star Dragon knew their location. And at this time, in the heart of Secret Base number 45, the Embryo Organization, a girl from the Special Agent Squad was outraged that they were called on a mission without even being given time to rest. The guy sitting with the laptop said that they were identified and that the system was initializing the format. Immediately, a voice came over the loudspeaker announcing a break-in. The soldiers, hearing the alarm and the order to go to the main room, rushed to the special agents. The girl noticed the approaching enemies and asked the guy to hurry. He replied that he came in, he needed 3 minutes, and the enemies would be here in a minute. The tall guy said that the commander gave them new equipment, and the guy with the laptop was worried that it might explode. The girl said that they had no choice because if the data was damaged, then everything was in vain. She took a deep breath and rushed towards the approaching enemies. Clutching the mechanical arm in her hands, she slammed it hard into the wall. The wall shattered into small pieces, and the girl was surprised that this hand was so powerful. The boy said he would hack the database and asked to cover for him. The girl asked him to hurry, fighting off a crowd of enemy soldiers. The guy quickly pressed the keys until he heard the cherished words that the system formatting was complete and self-destruction had been initiated. He ran up to the girl and said that he had downloaded everything successfully. They immediately rushed away from the enemy base, which soon exploded. At this time, at another secret base, Embryo, the man reported to the boss that the 45th base was destroyed by the Star Dragon. The boss asked how they knew about her. He replied that it was unknown yet and assumed that it was all Zero. The boss did not believe that an ordinary test subject could learn such information and sent the man away. Left alone, he pressed the button and heard that the identity was confirmed. After the connection, he gave the order to secretly check everyone and report if he found anyone suspicious. At the same time, the guys from the special squad were praised for their excellent work because they managed to obtain a lot of material. The man asked how the hand was, and the girl said with delight that thanks to it they were able to go out, and asked who made it. The man replied that he couldn't say that, and the girl asked if the headquarters would continue to give it to them. The sun was setting when the events moved to the workshop. Leia was sad because Hank had been missing for 3 days, and her grandfather said that he might have already died. With tears in her eyes, the girl asked her grandfather to help, but he immediately refused. He said when Leia stole his books, she didn't remember that he was her grandfather, to which the girl replied that in this case it would be worth selling all the wine that he was hiding in the basement. The man said he was not that petty and said it would be easy to just find him. Soon the phone rang in the head's office. The grandfather asked where they took the boy, and the man replied that he was now working for them, to which the old man asked to send him back. The man replied that the rules did not allow it, but the grandfather said that he made them up himself, and he had to agree. A black car pulled up to the workshop when it was already completely dark outside. Zero got out of the car and, putting his hands in his pockets, slowly walked towards the entrance. Leia immediately ran out to meet him. She began asking where he had been and if he knew how much they had been worried. With tears in her eyes, the girl said that they did not know what to do and were going to call the police. And when asked where he had gone, Zero sheepishly replied that he had been out for a walk. The girl grabbed him by the ear and asked angrily, couldn't he come up with anything better? Putting her hand on the guy's shoulder, Leia said that she saw the news about the shootout at the junkyard. She calmed down a little and said that she was very worried about him because she thought something had happened to him. Zero realized that the girl was truly worried and knew that he needed to call. Then the grandfather entered the room, saying that he was surprised by the boy's return. Leia told the guy that she would buy him a phone so that he would always be in touch. Zero said that it was not necessary because he already had it, showing off the new thing. Grandfather asked if this was really a coded telephone from the 13th Division. The boy said that this was how the division decided to keep an eye on him, but the old man lost his temper and said that he needed to leave immediately because there was no escaping the division. Suddenly, he changed his tone and asked if maybe he was staying here because he was interested in his granddaughter. The boy said embarrassedly that they had all misunderstood, and the grandfather exhaled. As he was leaving, Grandpa said that he didn't really understand the feelings of young people and asked Zero to try, because he wanted great-grandchildren. Leia turned away to hide her cheeks, which were flushed with embarrassment, not knowing that Zero's were the same. The boy said, embarrassed, that his grandfather meant something different or simply misunderstood. The girl turned around and, seeing the blush on the guy's cheeks, immediately understood everything. She said that if he says so, then it must be true and ran out of the room. Left alone, Zero took a breath, surprised by the awkwardness of the situation. He thought that old people who wanted grandchildren were very scary. Suddenly, he heard a signal indicating that he had received a new message. He saw that the progress of the mission to destroy the embryo had increased and realized that it was not in vain that he had submitted the division report. He had been thinking since the morning that it seemed that joining the intelligence service was perceived as indirect penetration. Zero knew that the embryo would strengthen its powers and that he had to take risks to obtain new designs. He collected the explosive bullets and thought with satisfaction that this was enough for now. The guy understood that this was a basic level weapon and he wouldn't be able to use it much. Soon a car stopped near the workshop and honked its horn, attracting attention. Zero turned around at the sound and thought that it was probably a vehicle from the 13th Division. The man told Zero that his report had been verified, and now they believed him. He extended his hand and said that the authorities had made a decision to accept him into the division. Hearing this, Zero thought with a smile that everything was going as he had planned. Jun said the organization assigned him to a covert operations unit. As Zero shook hands, he thought that he could attack the embryo directly, and the man suggested that he go to the division to report. Meanwhile, Leia was thinking that she simply had respect for our hero. Suddenly, Zero appeared behind her and said that he wanted to talk to her. The girl got scared and started saying that he was a good person, but Zero couldn't understand what was going on in her head. Barely holding back his laughter, he began to say that the country wanted him to become a civil servant, and he could not refuse them. He said he would help with the shop whenever he could because he didn't want the business to suffer. Hugging the pillow, the girl told him with a smile to be careful. Zero didn't expect such a reaction, and the girl said that he himself promised, and if he didn't keep his word, she would cut his salary. The guy thought that there were apparently no more misunderstandings and promised that he would keep his word. In the logistics department of the 13th Division, work proceeded slowly. A girl from the Special Forces unit came into the department and asked the guys if Stan was there. All the guys stared at the girl, and one of the guys said that it was him. The girl introduced herself as Yasmina and asked if he really was an ace in logistics, to which the guy sheepishly replied that he wasn't really. She asked him point blank if he had created the mechanical arm. The guy decided that something was wrong with the hand and thought that it was not surprising, because it was created by some simpleton. But Yasmina said she really liked it and added that she wanted to make a personal order. Stan was surprised by such a request and sheepishly said that he did not create it. The girl angrily asked why he didn't say that right away and left, upset that she had wasted her time. Stan's colleagues started to giggle at this scene, and he asked what they were laughing at. The new guy would most likely be sent to them. Then he would take care of him. At this time, in the 13th district of the Star Dragon, our hero approached the Secret Operations Department. Yasmina asked. So it was his director who personally assigned him to their squad. The guy had a bandage on his face and introduced himself as Hank, a mechanic. The guy in glasses said he was pleased to meet me and introduced himself as John, a hacker. The second guy said his name was Lambert, a sniper. The girl asked him why he needed a mask. Did he really not trust the guys? To which our hero replied that his personal information was confidential. Yasmina thought seriously about everything our hero said. Suddenly, she asked if he had created the mechanical arm, and Zero asked in surprise how she knew. She came closer and asked if he would mind creating another one for her, to which the guy replied that it all depended on the price. The girl called our hero a cheapskate, and he replied that he didn't even know her name. She gave her name and, striking a pose, added that she specializes in close combat. Zero asked, and there were only 4 in the squad, to which the girl said that there was also a captain, but he was now in the hospital. Hearing this, our hero said that since the captain ended up in the hospital, they probably had very complicated operations. The guy suddenly became sour and embarrassedly said that he was in the hospital because of poisoning. Suddenly, the computer made a sound, and the boys turned around in surprise. Jan opened the letter and said that the newcomer was lucky and received a task to destroy a famous bounty hunter, the Black Spider. Zero also received such a task, and he looked upset because the reward for it was too small. Lambert asked when we were leaving, and the girl replied that reconnaissance had already found him and that we were leaving at night. The city was covered by a blanket of night, and there was not a single star in the black sky. The guys left Zero in the car, saying that since this was his first operation, he would be the eyes and ears. The boy agreed, but to himself he thought that he wanted to kill mobs. Yasmina said that the small building ahead was the spider's hideout. He's most likely on the 3rd floor, and you have to be extremely quiet so as not to scare him away. But Zero said there was no need to be quiet, because the spider had already found them. Yasmina asked in surprise how he knew this. A figure with a machine gun in his hands watched them from the roof of a neighboring building. He opened fire on the Special Forces guys, but they managed to react and open fire. The girl said in surprise that they really did find them. A crowd of men in black uniforms with machine guns in their hands rushed towards them. John excitedly said that their information was false, because for some reason the spider was not alone. The boys fought off the attackers, and Spider loudly called them dogs from the 13th Division. He prepared to shoot, saying that he would tear off their heads since they dared to attack. Spider gave the order to the attackers to beat them up, and Yasmina said it was a disgrace. Lambert killed another attacker with a precise shot while John was reloading his machine gun. Taking out a sword from behind her back, Yasmina said that she was leaving the pawns to the boys. The girl added that she would take care of the boss herself. In a few leaps that would be impossible for an ordinary person, she approached the roof of the building where the spider was located. With a cry of die, the girl flew towards the spider, raising her sword above her head. The man stood below and seemed to be waiting for the left-hander to come next to him, and he was able to dodge the blow, jumping back at the last moment. He said that he respected the girl's courage, so he would kill her quickly. He said goodbye to the girl and fired a burst of machine gun fire, intending to shoot her. But Yasmina deftly dodged all the shots, approaching the spider. He thought that the girl was good at close and fist fighting, and decided that it would not be easy with her. But Yasmina did not waste time, and seeing that the man had opened up, she struck him. But from the way he fought back, the girl realized that close combat was not his strong point, and decided that now was her chance. Deftly putting the sword to the man's throat, she said, "Bye-bye, old man." Suddenly, the tip of the sword lengthened and cut the man's neck. Grasping the wound, he asked in surprise how the knife had become longer and added that it was good. The spider asked if she thought that was enough to kill him, but her voice grew weaker and there was more blood. Looking at the man in a pool of blood, the girl told Hank that she had done well and that it was an excellent knife. But our hero told her not to let her guard down because the black spider was still alive. The girl responded by saying that he was definitely dead, pointing to the man's lifeless body. Zero said that he was a superhuman and that it was not so easy to kill him and suggested taking off the mask. Yasmina still didn't believe him and said that she understood because he was a newbie and wanted to prove himself. She added that she knew better, and Lambert volunteered to look under the mask. The guy took off his mask and asked in surprise that this was not a person, looking at the unnatural face. Zero said that they needed to rip off the heads and also remove the masks from the others. John also began to take off his masks and said in shock that all these corpses had no faces. Zero directed the boys, pointing in the direction of the monster that needed to be neutralized. He said one was on the right, clockwise, and the other was at 4 o'clock. There was another one behind John. On the right, the guy quickly reacted and reloaded the machine gun. With one precise shot, he blew the monster's head off, leaving a hole in it. Lambert said that there was only one left and asked what to do with him, but Zero asked him not to kill him. The monster, which was once a spider, ran at the guys, and Zero asked to simply immobilize it. The monster kept repeating that they still couldn't kill him. Lambert easily twisted the monster's arms behind his back, and he asked if they knew about his power. Zero's voice from the drone said that his power is copying. Once in a certain time, he can create copies without faces, and he can also reincarnate into them. The monster angrily asked who he was, and Zero, sitting in the van, read the assignment and discussed the reward. The next evening, our hero arrived at the workshop as he promised. Leah said that the permit was almost ready, and they would soon be able to use the new space. Zero thought that he had received a lot of orders from agents for a retractable knife, and that he would soon be rich. And at the same time, in the logistics department of the 13th Division of the Star Dragon, the man angrily said that it was unheard of that he would not share the plans. The gray-haired man asked why they couldn't do anything without them and suggested finding an agent who would buy this knife so that they could make the drawing themselves. After some time, one of the guys came to the Secret Service department. The boy said with a smile that his boss had sent him to buy a knife and asked him to simply name the price. Yasmina replied that everyone knew they just wanted to copy the design, adding that it was wrong to do that. After all, the department, as if on command, turned away and walked away, and the guy asked them not to leave. The girl said that they should be ashamed of stealing someone else's property if they can't do it themselves. One of the guys asked if this was the knife he needed, and the guy from the logistics department asked how much he would sell it for. The guy said he would give it to him for $30,000 and no concessions, and he immediately agreed. Soon, the gray-haired man handed it to Stan and asked if he could copy it, and he replied that he could easily recreate it. The man said that if he succeeded, he would promote the guy to the research and development department. After a while, Zero asked in surprise how all the agents had canceled their orders, and Yasmina said that the logistics department had copied the weapon and was starting mass production. Looking at the finished knives, Zero said that if that was the case, then let them not blame him for being rude. Sometime later, in the 8th District, in an underground weapons firm, the man said the product was not bad and asked if he could supply it on a regular basis. Zero asked if he was interested in buying the blueprint. 1,000 knives cost 5,000 and the blueprint cost 1,000,000. The man asked if he was willing to give up the price, but our hero was adamant and the man agreed. The man soon confirmed that the retractable knife was now his and thanked her for her trust. But the man in the chair replied that it was too early to rejoice in success. Another man asked if he was worried about Hank's reaction, but since he didn't join the division, What would he do to them? The man in the chair asked if he really thought so and took out an envelope. The second man replied sheepishly that he thought so. The man in the chair asked if that was why he had taken the opportunity to resell the gun. Soon, the entire department was aware of what had happened. One guy told the other that the director was being investigated because he was reselling guns, and the other guy said that Hank had probably set him up. The guy replied that it meant he had secured the support of the top, and the second said that he was coming. Looking at Zero, the guy whispered in surprise that even the executive director was polite to him. They entered the conference room, and Zero was surprised that it was he who wanted to see him. Our hero was surprised that in front of him sat the same man from the workshop for whom he had made a prosthetic arm. Zero decided to pretend that he didn't remember the men and asked who he was. The man replied that he was simply taking part in the life of the 13th Division. He asked how they could resolve the situation, and Zero immediately shouted out that he was demanding compensation. The blonde said he sold the plans. Isn't that enough compensation? Zero responded by saying that if he hadn't sold his plans, he would have earned more. But is that compensation? The guy added that if he had asked directly, our hero might have sold them to the division. The head offered to listen to his conditions and expressed hope that something like this would not happen again in the future. Zero waited until everyone had finished speaking, and then, lowering his voice a little, said that there was one more thing. He said he wanted to look at the knowledge of advanced mechanical engineering. The man with gray hair looked sternly at our hero. There was complete silence in the hall. No one dared to say a word. Zero thought hard that this was a great chance, because the 6 nations had different statements, and only reliable people had access. He clenched his fist in tension, because this would determine his success, and in case of failure, he would have to spend a lot of time. The man crossed his arms over his chest and said seriously that he allowed it. Our hero did not believe in his success and only looked at it in surprise. The blonde suddenly shouted that advanced knowledge required level 5 access and that it was against the rules. The man said he just wanted to take a look, so they would give him an hour. They immediately went to the underground headquarters of the 13th Division. Zero was told that this was the entrance and that he needed to read the rules before he could enter. The chief said that surveillance was being conducted 24 hours a day and that the entrance would close in exactly 1 hour. Our hero was pleased because he didn't need an hour. He would learn everything in 1 minute. Zero walked up to the large device and placed his hands on it, while the men stayed behind. The guy quickly found advanced knowledge. The Star Dragon has only one material, but it is well studied. Information about the synthesis of advanced material appeared on the screen, and the question, to study or not. Zero pressed the confirm button and the system asked not to pause the process. Soon he learned everything and received the mechanic skill. But the guy was not surprised by this, because in his past life he was also a mechanic. While studying the material, he felt as if his body was being filled with energy. The chief crossed his arms in displeasure and asked why the guy was smiling. And Zero's face really did have a satisfied smile, because he had succeeded. The stats window showed that he was a Superman. This was the first step to superiority, but he had better not get cocky. After studying the material, our hero went to the workshop. He thought that after the improvement, his aura began to emit magnetism, and to level up, he still needed to train. The mobile phone lying nearby made a short ringing sound. It was a message that the captain was calling everyone. Our hero immediately sent the Star Dragon to the Secret Service Department. There, the guy asked again in surprise, did Hank really say that he would no longer sell him weapons? He dismissively said that the guy was just a mechanic, and if he needed it, he would buy the weapon. His colleagues responded to the words with complete silence, and the guy became nervous, asking if this was really not true. And Zero was standing nearby at that moment, but he didn't show it and looked ahead. Soon Yasmina approached him. She was also silent, looking forward at the captain. The muscular guy, crossing his arms, sternly asked our hero if he was Hank. John said that he was their captain and that they could hire new people only if he agreed. But since his candidacy was promoted by his superiors, the captain may not be very friendly. The guy coughed and said that he forgot to introduce himself. He is Vincent. Zero was surprised to himself by his name, which was not typical for a young guy. The captain said that there were 5 of them on the team, and Zero would handle supplies because he didn't have faith in his abilities yet. He said that he would follow all his instructions, and if the guy did not live up to his expectations. The captain threw the Mandarin's remains into the trash, adding that then he would throw him out of the squad. The guy was surprised that even the Secret Service could be entered through connections, and that no one thought about their subordinates. Zero felt upset that he was being perceived as a person with connections. The computer made a sound and John called everyone, saying that here was his news. The guy said they had an urgent mission and their superiors wanted them to join. One of the squads was trapped when they attacked the embryo base, and they are asked to provide assistance. As he was getting ready, John said he would report the rest of the details on the plane. The captain told John to take care of the rear, and Zero asked him to teach him and added that he should fight to be useful. Zero readily said that he understood everything, surprising Ian with such an answer. He stopped Yasmina and said that it was a friendly gift, handing her a suitcase with red bullets. The girl asked rather if these were new developments, and Zero asked not to use them too much. The guys went on a mission, and Zero received the same task in the information window. Jan tried to calm our hero down, saying that the captain was not against him and asked him not to take it to heart. Somewhere in the desert, several military vehicles were racing across the sand. The blonde man in the front seat glanced out the window with displeasure when he saw that they were being followed. He shouted angrily why there was still no reinforcement. Looking at the dozens of pursuit cars, a helicopter immediately hovered above them, from which a special forces unit jumped out. Yasmina was used last, and the captain told the man to calm down. He lifted his helmet and pressed the transmitter button, saying they were there. John said that the group was 3 kilometers away, and there were also 15 armored SUVs there. The goal was to rescue the squad. Looking at the captain's equipment, Zero was surprised that they had a prototype combat suit. The captain gave the order to all of his detachment to get ready, and the soldiers took up positions. They waited until the enemy vehicles approached, and the captain gave the order to fire. The soldiers opened fire on the approaching enemy SUVs. The captain took aim and fired at the driver's side window. Lambert realized what the captain was doing and shot at the wheel of the same SUV. The car lost control and crashed into the cars behind it. The fair-haired man rode up to the captain and said that there were too many of them and they had to retreat. At that moment, a helicopter hovered above them, with Hell sitting on board. A purple flame rained down on them, and the captain ordered a retreat. Looking at the soldiers who were hit, he shouted that it was a psychological attack. The girl, surrounded by purple flames, was ready for a new blow. Zero approached the monitor and, seeing what was happening, took the headphones and yawned. He put on the headphones and said that she was the embryo's combat commander. Our hero shouted for them to retreat immediately, and Vincent angrily asked what he was doing. But unlike him, Yasnima and Lambert listened to Zero and said that they accepted the order. But they didn't have time to retreat because Hell was already approaching Yasmina. The girl was able to take and parry Hell's blow, remaining on her feet. Yasmina immediately counterattacked, surprising the girl with her fist fighting style. Both girls took a stance, preparing to continue the fight. Hell quickly struck the girl in the face and she spat blood on the ground. Yasmina understood that there was a big difference between them and even close combat would not give an advantage, so she would lose. The girl tried to strike again, but Hell gathered purple flame in her hand. Yasmina flew back, not even having time to touch the enemy commander. Catching her breath, the girl asked Hank to think of something quickly. The guy said to get ready to use the mechanical arm, and when the enemy opens up, Lambert will shoot. The girl immediately put her hand in her pocket, and metal plates began to gather around her. Lambert prepared to shoot, taking a comfortable position. He was looking at Hell through the scope, and the girl at that moment was distracted by something. Her attention was drawn to the mechanical hand that appeared on Yasmina's hand. The first blow hit the target and Hell was unable to block it. But the girl managed to block the second blow, albeit with great difficulty. Hell asked the girl what kind of relationship she had with Zero. Yasmina asked in confusion who this Zero was, and Lambert took advantage of this and fired. Hell managed to notice the shot and covered herself with a force barrier. But from the force of the shot, she flew far away from Yasmina. Holding his hand, Hell landed and Zero told Vincent to take Yasmina and run from there. The captain no longer disputed Zero's knowledge and replied that he accepted it. He picked up the wounded girl on his back and ran forward towards the car. A man from the squad they were supposed to save was already waiting for them in the car. Looking back, the captain thought that the enemy machines were slower and the superhumans were hurt. They would not be able to pursue them. If they can get to the helicopter, they can escape safely. The captain said that everything was fine now and immediately heard a voice in the earpiece from above. Zero reminded them that the enemy also had a helicopter. At that very moment, a helicopter appeared not far from their car, flying towards them. Several missiles were fired from the helicopter and exploded behind the vehicle. Trying to hold on, the captain told Lambert to shoot them. But the guy replied that he had run out of armored bullets, and that regular ones couldn't shoot down the helicopter. Vincent wondered desperately if they were really all going to die here. But suddenly, Zero's voice in all the boys' headphones said, "Have they really forgotten about his gift?" Opening the briefcase containing the red bullets, Lambert asked what they were doing. But in response, Zero only said that they should try it, and then they would find out. Without asking any unnecessary questions, Lambert loaded his machine gun and began to aim. He fired right at the bottom of the helicopter, and it immediately caught fire and flew down. The driver couldn't believe his eyes as he saw the helicopter fly away. John said that their helicopter was almost there, and the captain shouted what kind of bullets these were. Where did he get them? Watching the helicopter fly away, Hell told her boss that they were on Zero's trail. Soon the guys returned to the department and Ian admired Zero, saying that he was very cool. Suddenly the captain coughed, clearly attracting the attention of the entire squad. He sheepishly apologized to our hero for doubting his abilities, because without him they would not have survived. Vincent extended his hand and said that he greeted him as the squad leader. Zero said with a smile that there was no need to apologize for such trifles. The guys shook hands and Zero added that he was a generous man. The captain still felt awkward and thought it sounded sarcastic. Someone came through the door and the captain asked what he was doing there, since his squad was having a meeting. The blonde said he wanted to ask if those cartridges were for sale. Vincent asked Zero what he thought and suggested that he rip the guy off. Our hero replied that of course they sell one cartridge for 50. The man said he wanted to pre-order 200 and placed an order for assorted caliber cartridges. Here Yasmin intervened in the conversation and said that she would attract buyers for Zero for a discount. The boy thought that he could make good money selling cartridges, so there was no need to worry about finances for now. Soon Stan was holding a cartridge in his hands, thinking that the boss had forbidden him to study them because he was afraid of Stan. He decided to find out if they were being made at a factory, then he would report it to his superiors, and Hank would get it. He began to disassemble the cartridge, and having separated the head part, began to examine its components. Stan thought that if everything went according to plan, his superiors would look at him differently. Suddenly, an explosion went off in the office, tearing the room to pieces. A message immediately came over the loudspeaker that a fire had started in the workshop. The boss immediately rushed into the office and, seeing what was happening, asked what he was doing there. Stan's face and hair were burnt, and he tried to justify himself to his boss with tears in his eyes. Here they saw a disassembled cartridge, and the chief ordered them to explain. The man said he remembered him and added that he could get out of office. After some time, a confused voice was heard from the secret missions department. The man who had previously sold the knife asked in surprise how it was that they wouldn't sell him cartridges. Yasmina said that Hank remembers him. He is now on the blacklist, so he will not have any business with him and apologies will not help. He approached the guy from the department and asked him to resell the cartridges to him, but the guy immediately refused. The other guy said no one would sell them to him because they would insult Hank, and it wasn't worth the money. Meanwhile, the logistics department was bustling with activity. Stan gathered his things and left the department in disgrace, to the whispers of his colleagues. He thought sadly about what had happened and thought that he was still so young. The action moved to one of the embryo's secret bases. The guy brought the report to his boss and stood waiting for him to read it all. The man was surprised to read that the girl from Star Dragon had a hand like Zero, but he didn't have access to the location of the bases. The boss replayed the recording of Zero saying he would cut them all out and wondered who he was. He gave the order to send newbies to the Star Dragon to observe Zero, and if they found a lead, send us to deal with it. An unsuspecting Zero returned to the workshop when it was already evening outside. Jun revealed that Embryo's scouts have begun to take action, and it seems they know that Zero is working for them. Our hero replied that he had already guessed this. Getting into the car, the man said that there was nothing to worry about. Security guards would be watching around the clock. Zero asked the man to get 2 Crazy Eagle pistols from their warehouse, and he agreed. Looking at the car leaving, Zero thought that they had finally appeared and needed to get ready. In recent days, Zero hardly left the workshop, working on new inventions. Soon he received word that he had produced a superior platinum alloy. As he examined the item, the boy thought that rare minerals fetch good prices. Soon he made a saber from high-quality platinum and looked at it with satisfaction. Zero was distracted by a message saying that the release of the Mad Eagle had been approved. In the training hall, Yasmina asked what this updated version of the saber was and immediately began to evaluate it. The girl began to try out the new thing and easily cut the steel rod. She said that this saber was sharper and overall much better than the previous one. Meanwhile, Zero tried out the Crazy Eagle and decided that it had very decent quality. Having given the saber, Yasmina said that it was hard to part with it and asked to bring it again. Sitting in the locker room, Zero thought that he now had enough weapons to deal with the embryo. Taking a breath, he saw a message that the training had been successful. Suddenly, a message appeared that his level had increased, and the guy clenched his hand in satisfaction. Zero decided that given the momentum, he would surpass the first group of players by the time open testing began. The next message indicated that closed testing was planned. Apparently, it will be held for a limited number of players a week before the open one. 1 day in reality is equal to 6 in the game, which means there are about 40 days left. Zero wondered if the clock might work differently while the server was down. Here he remembered that when updating, a couple of days pass, but here the time span is measured in years. He realized that in this case, with each update, he would have much more time for development. At this point, Zero wondered whether he should start worrying about his life expectancy. Suddenly, he noticed a message that the NPC functions in the players' forum were unlocked. He read the message in surprise, not understanding what kind of functions these were. He decided that the forum could be useful and decided to register in it. But he immediately received an error and realized that he would not be able to register because of the dive capsule. Zero stretched and decided that when the players showed up, he would need to find a way to get the reading function. A high-rise modern building stood among similar high-rise buildings, shrouded in haze. There was a man sitting in a gaming chair, and in front of him were two monitors. He was diving into the world and received a message that the random selection of the birthplace was complete. A bright flash of light illuminated the planet, and he received a new message that the starting point was the Big Horn Village. He also received coordinates. It was a forest path, and there were rows of trees around it. The boy opened his purple eyes and saw a message that the conception was taking place. Suddenly, a circle appeared on the ground in the clearing, and from it a blue rectangle rose up, resembling a portal. A guy with elf ears and the nickname Wild Sword Level 2 came out of it. There, many similar portals began to appear, from which people emerged. The gathering place was in Star Dragon, Bighorn Village. It was an ordinary village where people did not notice the appearance of the strangers and went about their business. The players realized that this was a village of carters and looked around for various clues. Suddenly, someone approached them, addressing them as if they were strangers. It was the old man who said that if they wanted to eat, they had to find work. They didn't want any slackers here. The Wild Sword looked and saw an information window where it was written that this was the mysterious old man. He told the boys that they needed to harvest the crops and unload the sacks, adding that they should work hard. The boy thought that there were few resources in the village, and if he wanted to get ahead, he needed a strategy. He decided to explore as many places as possible, finding an axe among the stones. Having sold it to a merchant, Wild Sword received money and realized that it would be easier to settle there. He paid the proceeds to the old man and bought a map from him. Looking at the map, he saw that the closest city to him was the western capital. The guy looked up from the map and began to look around the area, deciding where to go. After thinking for a while, he decided to go to the capital and take a good look at everything there. He soon reached the capital and successfully passed the post of Star Dragon. It was there, as if waiting for the players to appear, that Zur sat sipping coffee. Here in the crowd, he saw a guy with a nickname written above his head, Wild Sword. The player felt like someone was watching him and began to look around. He noticed Zero sitting in a cafe with a sign above his head that said, Mysterious Stranger. He was able to see that his name was Hank and the danger level was fatal. After reading this, the Wild Sword pulled back in horror, surprised at the level of danger. He thought the city must be safe and decided to leave quietly before he was noticed. But the guy didn't have time to leave. Zero asked him if it wasn't rude to examine someone you see for the first time. The fighting sword immediately assumed a defensive posture and, stuttering, asked what he wanted. Zero was calm and replied that he needed help, asking if the guy had time. The boy thought that this was a hidden mission, and Zero was an NPC and was glad that the heavens chose him. Zero said he needed a piece of bread and asked if the boy could get it. He happily saw the task appear in the information window. Reading it, the boy didn't understand why high-level ones had such a simple task with a small reward. But after thinking for a bit, he decided that since Zero was a high level, it would be a chain of missions. That is, after completing one task, he will give the next one. Rejoicing at his own cleverness, the boy was proud that years of gaming had helped him understand logic. He immediately took out a mountain of bread and handed it to Zero, saying that this was all the supplies. He kept a close eye on Zero, expecting to receive a new assignment from him. The next task was to hit 10 passersby on the butt for the price of $1. While performing his Wild Sword, I almost got hit on the head a couple of times for my insolence. The next task was to take off the pants and the patrolman, which he successfully accomplished. Dancing in front of everyone, the Wild Sword wondered what kind of depraved tasks these were. Having completed all the tasks, he was able to open Hank's store, where he saw expensive, powerful weapons. Looking at them, the boy thought they were cool, but too expensive. Hank also offered training in hand-to-hand combat, weapons handling, and other lessons. The Wild Sword decided that he, as a responsible scientific leader, and that this was his chance. The boy decided that if he trained him, he would quickly overtake all the players. When he agreed to become a mechanic, he thought that if he didn't take advantage of the chance, he would blame himself for the rest of his life. A blue glow appeared around you, Wild Sword, and he looked at his hands in surprise. Noticing that Zero was leaving, the boy asked where he could find him. In response, our hero handed him a piece of paper with the address of his workshop. The boy looked at the piece of paper with the address, and Zero walked on without looking back. The Wild Sword slyly thought that it was necessary to keep this NPC a secret from others. Looking after Zero, he thought that this way, he would definitely be able to overtake the other players. And our hero thought that Wild Sword was a funny guy. He was once one of the top 20 martial artists to reach the semifinals. Zero thought that the mechanic was an unremarkable class at first, but he would thank him later. Other players also actively took up the quests to raise their levels. Looking at them, Zero thought that many players had already completed the story of the village for beginners. He stopped next to a seated man with a sign that read, "Homeless Old Man." Looking at the players, he thought that they were obsessed with profit, not the game itself. Our hero knew that for money, they would do whatever he asked. Zero suddenly thought that they could become his main support in the fight against the embryo. He turned to the boys and, calling them warriors, said that he needed their help. The guys decided that he looked like a high-level one and asked him what he wanted. Looking at the menu, Zero realized that there was a limit on the rewards, and he couldn't set the point amount higher than it. He won't be able to give the task to destroy the embryo because the point limit is not enough. While Zero was thinking that he needed to be enlarged, the players started to rush him. The guy gave out a task, and the players were surprised to read the task about bread for $1. They immediately refused, deciding that it would be better for them to carry bricks. When Zero left, he worsened his relationship with the players, which greatly upset them. Time passed, and our hero continued to spend most of his time in the workshop. Leia said that the Wild Sword follows him every day. He might give him a chance. Zero gave him the task of going outside and bobbing like seaweed for 10 minutes. Our hero answered her that in reality, everything is not what it seems. The boy thought sadly that the God's Family Guild paid well, and Zero noticed that he went to read the forum. Suddenly, our hero heard the guy say that it would be good to find Zero, and he tensed up. He immediately opened the information window and began to study the news. Suddenly, he came across a Class B task that shouldn't be on the test: Study Zero. He realized that his presence had changed the game, and although the players were not a threat, he should not let his guard down. Leia asked where Zero went for lunch, and the guy replied that he was going to the workshop. She said that every day is the same, adding that workaholism is a terrible thing. Our hero did not listen to her and sat down at the table, continuing to work on new inventions. Suddenly, he received a message that he had provoked a new mission, a secret assassination, and his goal was to survive. As Zero got dressed, he decided that he needed to deal with the killer before worrying about the players. As he walked down the street, he thought that Leia had stayed in the workshop, which meant she should be safe. Entering the alley, he decided that this place was very suitable for a surprise fight. Zero heard some movement behind him and turned around abruptly. Suddenly, a huge black raven began to approach him at high speed. Our hero began to be surrounded by crows, enveloping him in something like a white rope. The rope tightened around the boy's neck, and he thought tensely that the enemy was not so simple, and he could not free himself. Zero looked around and saw red waves approaching him. It was as if he was being lifted onto a cross with ropes, and a huge eye was watching everything. The guy realized that this was an illusion, and the attacker's level was just like hell's. He realized that the more he resisted, the tighter the rope tightened around his hands. He tried to resist, but the thought that today it would all end crept into his head. Here he saw a message that he was under the influence of an illusion. But since his intelligence was higher, he could resist it. The next moment, the illusion shattered into tiny pieces. But as soon as he freed himself, some man put a gun to his head and said, "Goodbye, Zero." The man pulled the trigger, but Zero managed to dodge it using one of his skills. The attacker was at a loss as to how the boy was able to dodge the shot at such a close range. Taking advantage of the confusion, our hero smiled and pulled the pistol out of its holster. He used another skill and started shooting at the man with 2 pistols at once. But the man raised his shield, and Zero thought that he had the same defense as hell, deciding that he was a difficult opponent. The man thought that according to intelligence, Zero was at the level of a special agent, but he was clearly stronger. Realizing that the information was inaccurate, the man decided to back off and come up with a new plan. He turned around and, seeing Zero chasing him, folded his arms, using his illusion again. Everything around turned red again, and crows began to circle around the guy. But this did not stop Zero for a second, and he reloaded the pistol with those same cartridges. The man was surprised that he had dispelled the illusion, and Zero shot him. The flammable round easily penetrated the man's shield, and Zero said that he acknowledged his strength. He added that the same technique doesn't work on him twice, looking at the charred corpse of the attacker. Soon, there was already a crowd of people from the Star Dragon at the battle site. Jun ran out of the car, apologizing for being late, and asked Zero if he was okay. The guy pointed to his broken cheek and asked if he looked okay. Jun said with a serious expression that he was to blame for what happened and that he was sorry. Zero said it was fine and pointed to the body, saying it was an Embryon officer and the best killer. Jun realized in shock that it was the famous Nosa Krinko. Rubbing his neck, Zero replied that it was him, ignoring the worried look. The man asked in shock how Zero was able to defeat Nosa, despite the fact that he attacked suddenly. Jun was very surprised at how strong Zero was and looked after him in amazement. Getting into the car, Zero looked at the reward for completing the mission. It was a character card of Nos Krinka, and smiled at the nice gift from Embryo. Getting behind the wheel, Jun said that they were first heading to headquarters to report the situation. Zero was upset and said that since Nosa found him, it meant that Embryo already knew his location. The man said that this was not certain because hackers monitor all messages and there was no information about Zero. But our hero was wary and asked distrustfully if the man was sure about this. Jun said that Nosa would not have acted arbitrarily. He could have either passed on the information or someone could have personally gone to the capital to report to the authorities. Suddenly, Zero pushed the man out of the car and said that they needed to be captured or Embryo would find out where he was. As he got into the driver's seat, he asked Jun to block off the entire city so that no one could leave. Jun asked Zero to calm down, since it was unknown who exactly the spy was. But the guy didn't listen to him anymore and pressed the gas pedal, leaving the surprised man on the ground. Our hero smiled mischievously because he knew exactly who the spy was. He sped forward along the highway, breaking all traffic rules. Having contacted Yasmina, he asked her to come to the 8th district as soon as possible, and added that he had sent her the coordinates. The girl asked why she needed to go to the slums, to which Zero replied that she should hurry up and ask fewer questions. Very soon, Zero rushed into the 8th district and was approaching the abandoned church. When our hero arrived, Yasmina was already waiting for him, next to the yellow sports car she had arrived in. Seeing the guy, she asked what was going on and why the rush, but Zero said to just follow him. Entering the church, our hero thought that if he was not mistaken, then Embryo's contact should be here. He looked carefully at everyone present and immediately realized that he was not there. Zero turned to the man and asked if he knew where Lugorn had gone. The man replied fearfully that he had not seen him today. Our hero took out a pen and began to quickly draw something on a piece of paper. Soon Zero showed a rather detailed portrait of the man and asked if that's what he looked like. He began to list its distinguishing features, but the man still said that it was not there today. Zero handed the portrait to the girl, asked her to send it to the bureau, and decided to go to the nearest post, in case he could intercept it. When she contacted the bureau, Yasmina said that such a person had not left the city, and Zero asked her to hold on tight because he was a fast driver. The girl said, offended, that one shouldn't underestimate her. She was a warrior after all. Zero floored the gas, and the car shot forward, and he thought that Lugorn couldn't have left earlier than an hour ago, since he had received the information only recently. The guy guessed that he had to head to the nearest post, most likely the northwest one. The car rushed forward like a rocket across the railroad crossing. Yasmina screamed in fear that he needed to slow down because there was a train ahead. But Zero rushed right in front of the train's nose, accompanied by the girl's deafening scream. Clutching the door handle, the girl asked in fear if he was really tired of living. The yellow sports car sped along the highway towards the checkpoint, overtaking cars one after another. Meanwhile, a lot of people gathered at the post office and began to get indignant. People asked how the exit was closed. Someone shouted that he urgently needed to go on business. Lugorn was also among this crowd and looked at the closed train in surprise, not believing that Nosa could lose. Suddenly, one of the guards noticed the man and shouted loudly that it was him. Zero drove up to the post and introduced himself as a special agent of the 13th Division, and the soldier asked for documents. Looking at the half-dead Yasmina, the soldier asked excitedly if she was okay. The girl threw up, and Zero mockingly asked why she threw up like that if she was a warrior. At this time, one of the soldiers twisted Lugorn and shouted at him to lie still and not move. Taking his pistol out of his holster, Zero thought with a smile that he had come just in time. The soldiers looked at our hero in shock, but he thought that he had poison in his teeth and under his nails anyway, and he would have killed himself. Sometime later, at the Embryo base, in the Valley of the Black Crow on the border of the Star Dragon and Haze, one of the guys approached the chairman and said that the hint for the task had changed. There was a point on the map and it said that my location was 0 in the western capital of the Star Dragon. The guy happily said that the search area had narrowed and that after the server opened, people would definitely be able to find it. He said that the reward for this B-class mission would allow them to leave other organizations far behind. At this time, the boss of Embryo was sitting in his office and listening to the report. After listening to the man, he angrily shouted that it was this 0 again. The man asked if he really thought he would give up if he had defenders. He jumped up and ordered that his exact location be found out, sending all his best forces there, adding that he would stop at nothing. At the same time, at the headquarters of the 13th Division of the Star Dragon, Zero looked at the information that the closed testing was completed and was convinced that he was right. When updating, the real time does not correspond to the game time. The chief looked at him sternly and asked why he was moving his finger in the air. But then he changed the subject and asked how much information he knew about the embryo. Zero smiled, even though it was hidden under his mask, and said that they already knew where he was. The exact location is unknown, but they already know that he is in the western capital and will definitely send assassins here. The chief was stern and asked what he was going to do. Taking off his mask, Zero said with a smile that he would no longer hide and would confront the embryo. The chief responded excitedly that this could not be done because it was too dangerous. Zero pointed out another embryo base on the map, saying that it was different from the previous three and that he would personally take part in clearing it out. The chief said that this was nonsense because the embryo would want to take advantage of it. Zero smiled mysteriously and said that he could create one thing that would change his appearance. The chief was beside himself with irritation and told him to do it, and then they would talk. Zero returned to the workshop and mused that the Star Dragon would most likely agree to attack the base in the Black Crow Valley. It is located next to the starting city for newbies, and if it is destroyed, the number of players who can join Embryo will be reduced significantly. Seeing the old man lying on the sofa, Zero was glad that Lewis was home. He looked into the room and, choosing his words, called the old man by name. Finally, plucking up his courage, he said that he wanted to borrow some books on mechanics to read. The old man was lying on the bed with a bottle of wine in his hands and asked why he needed them. Looking at Lewis's dissatisfied face, Zero knew that it wouldn't be easy to persuade him. Receiving no answer, the old man suddenly stood up and walked forward, inviting Zero to follow him. They entered the library and the old man said that they were standing there, pointing to the books. As he was leaving, he said that Zero could choose the ones he needed himself and asked not to spoil them. Our hero thanked the old man, wondering why he was so accommodating today. As he left, the old man waved his hand and asked not to tell Leia that he had led the killer away from the workshop. Zero immediately began studying the books. Flipping through them one after another, he learned new skills. After putting down the last book, Zero thought contentedly that all mechanic skills had risen by one level. With a smile, he decided that he could now create a drawing and carried out a fusion of several skills. A drawing of the mask and congratulations on the invention of the smart mask appeared on the information window. After creating a new blueprint, Zero sent it to the secret department of the 13th Division. The commander asked John, sent Lion a report, and the guy replied that he had just done it. Soon, the head entered the office and said that he still thought it was dangerous for Zero to participate in the operation and asked if he had created a shape-shifting item. The guy replied with a smile that he had created it and turning away asked to wait a minute. Hidden under the hero's hair, on his forehead, was a yellow triangle, which he pressed. He soon turned to the leader and captain and they froze in shock when they saw Zero's new face. He looked completely different and asked if he could now join the squad. The leader came closer and thoughtfully said that he really didn't look like himself. He immediately changed his manner of speaking and ingratiatingly asked if Zero wanted to sell them the drawing. The boy responded that it was an ordinary mask and added that they could make one themselves. The chief agreed, and our hero thought that this mask not only changes appearance, but also remembers other faces. Zero decided that he would better keep quiet about this function because it might come in handy in the future. As he left, the leader said that Zero could join his squad and added that there was still a month before the start, so there was time to prepare. When the boss left, Yasmina ran up to Zero and asked him to let her play with his mask. Our hero asked her to be quiet because he had something to say. He approached the captain and asked him to send him his prototype of the armor and said that he wanted to make some adjustments to it. Vincent didn't believe what he heard and asked again if Zero was joking. Our hero began to list a bunch of different changes that he plans to make to the captain's armor. Vincent's eyes lit up from what he heard, and all he could say was excellent and wonderful. Taking out the phone, our hero said that he first needed to pay for the assembly, and the captain agreed. Zero showed the cost of the armor overhaul on the screen, and the captain's joy turned to shock. He said that it used to be cheaper, and Zero asked if his parents were still alive, and the guy replied that they were not. Afterwards, Zero asked if he had any sisters and brothers, and the guy replied that he was the only child in the family. The boy mockingly asked if he had a girlfriend or a wife, and the captain sadly replied that he was all alone. Zero asked again what he needed the money for, and the captain agreed to pay. This answer satisfied our hero, and he said that he would go and prepare everything necessary. As he left the 13th Division building, Zero asked not to be disturbed for the foreseeable future. For 10 days, Zero worked in the workshop without leaving it. His phone was blowing up with the number of messages he received, as if someone was texting him non-stop. It was Yasmina. She was worried that Zero wasn't getting in touch, and besides, everyone was calling her about new orders. Zero tested new inventions, grenades, a folding saber, and a compact hang glider. He also increased the efficiency and combat power of the mechanical right arm by adding more weapons to it. After calling Yasmina, he told her with a mischievous smile that they could now move out. At this time, the military was waiting at the Western Capital train station for the Star Dragon. The blonde called the captain and asked why the squad was still not there. At the same time, a military SUV was approaching the waiting area at high speed. Everyone froze, and looking at the car, everyone thought that it was a very cool car. A train was racing between the rocks and the river, and the measured clatter of its wheels was heard throughout the area. It was a military train, which, having waited for our heroes, set off on a mission. The man introduced himself as Balder and said that he would be leading a squad on this building. New faces appeared among the familiar guys, and Balder suggested discussing the details. He said that they work together with intelligence. Their goal is to penetrate enemy territory and report information about the security. The exact location of the base could not be determined from an aerial photograph due to the relief of the valley. Balder said that since they don't know the exact location, they'll have to make a ground invasion. A girl with long hair named Dee asked if a reconnaissance squad wouldn't be enough. Balder frowned and replied irritably that they would not agree. Yasmina pushed the girl away, wondering what these stupid questions were for, and asked if she had any ideas. The man said that there is a village in the valley where many wanderers live, and it is located next to the base, so there are scouts there. He attached a photo and said that these 3 people would be suitable as informants. The first is the main leader, Quan. He is skilled in martial arts and uses a blade. Balder said that there was little information about the second deputy, Nicholas. The third is the head of security. He is an excellent user of various firearms and is a well-trained special agent. Balder said they sent a special reconnaissance team. They will join them upon arrival. The commander asked if 2 squads of special agents would really work together. Yasmina asked excitedly if they would become a hindrance to their squad. She wanted to say something else, when suddenly she was thrown forward and the girl barely managed to stay in place. She asked why they stopped so abruptly and heard someone shout that they were under attack and they needed to prepare for battle. A huge black monster with red eyes burst into the train and everyone exclaimed, "Is this really a black earthworm?" The worm was huge in size and high level. It had strong armor and dealt damage to metal elements. As Zero watched the worm devour the soldier, he thought with irritation at why they had come across such a difficult monster. One of the soldiers had already armed himself with a machine gun and shouted to everyone to start firing. Several soldiers opened fire on the monster, trying to wound it, but all the bullets were reflected by the worm's strong armor, flying away from it without causing damage. The soldier shouted that the bullets couldn't hit him because his armor was too strong. Yasmina entered the battle and, rushing towards the monster, shouted at the soldiers to move out of the way. The girl clutched the saber made by Zero in her hand and approached the worm closely. She dealt him a few blows and said that he could be wounded in close combat, asking him to think of something. Dee stuck her head out the window with a pistol and suggested setting it on fire, since worms are afraid of fire. Lambert loaded the red explosive cartridges into the rod and said he would try it. The guy took aim and fired an explosive cartridge at one of the monsters. The bullet easily pierced the monster's armor, and it immediately burst into flames. Having assessed the effectiveness, Lambert began shooting the remaining worms, and soon only burning bodies remained on the ground. Yasmina sighed with relief and said that it was very good that he went with them. The train continued on to its destination, and everyone on it rejoiced that they had been saved. Soon the train with our heroes arrived in Highland, at the railway station. The boys looked around, watching the boys and girls walking around. John said that morals here are clearly loose, since girls wear bikinis and guys are topless. They were met by a man in a straw hat who introduced himself as Fred from the Highland Intelligence Department. He led the boys, offering to submit a report to the command center. Suddenly, something caught the attention of Jan and Zero, and they looked in the same direction together. 2 soldiers looked at them, and when their eyes met, one of them spat contemptuously. Fred told the colonel that the agents had arrived, and he replied that they should be taken away for arrest and not allowed to wander off. Entering the break room, John said he felt like the other soldiers were looking at them with disdain, and the colonel was indifferent. The captain said that in the past, the Star Dragon and Highland had disagreements and they don't like them. John said sadly that all that was left was to focus on completing the task. After listening to the guy, Zero stood up and said that he would go out for a smoke, heading towards the door. He went outside and, leaning against the car, lit a cigarette. Suddenly, he heard the signal of a new task and opened the information window. He received his first group assignment, and the guy read its conditions, and if he shows himself well, he will receive more rewards. Suddenly, he noticed someone approaching him and looked away. A dark-skinned girl approached him and asked if he was from the Star Dragon. Zero calmly replied that everything was exactly like that, looking at the girl. Suddenly, she snatched a dagger and brought it to our hero's neck. but he didn't even move. The girl asked why he didn't dodge, and Zero asked why he would do that. She asked with a smile if he really thought she couldn't cut him. Zero's neck was covered in thin steel plates, and he replied that she could try. At that very moment, the girl felt a pistol pressed against her side. The girl introduced herself tensely, saying that she was from intelligence and that her name was Vinna. Our hero was still calm and also introduced himself, saying his name was Hank. Vinna said she would remember his name and walked away without looking back. Balder watched all this and thought that their meeting did not confuse the guy at all and did not aggravate the relationship. He decided with a satisfied smile that our hero was strong and was showing himself well. And at this time, among the cars, a male voice asked how the test went. Winna told Fred that Hank was a tough cookie, unable to find any other words. The military vehicles were approaching the assembly point, with the Star Dragon squad vehicle leading the way. Fred said that once everyone was assembled, they could begin. They had a stronghold in the Raven Valley. He pointed to the car and said it was very distinctive, to which Balder replied that their unit was full of them. Dee listened to the man's boasting in surprise, and the captain said that it was good that they had such a mechanic in their squad. Yasmina, who was sitting in the front seat of the car, told Zero that he was driving surprisingly calmly today. Ian was worried that they were already out of sight and needed to be caught up with, but Zero thought they would have to stop and wait. Dee asked on the radio where they had disappeared and asked if Zero really couldn't drive, and the guy replied that he didn't want to waste gas. The blonde added that the Highlanders were continuing to bully them and they couldn't be given another reason, and the captain agreed that they needed to be caught up with. But Yasmina, who knew Zero's driving style, asked the captain not to say that. Vincent asked what she was afraid of, and the girl asked if they didn't want to survive. Zero, after listening to the arguments, said that he understood everything and he would just speed up a little. He immediately asked the passengers to hold on tight and press the gas pedal. The car rushed forward, and Yasmina screamed that they would regret this. The black SUV quickly caught up with the Highland cars and overtook them at great speed. The soldier in the car behind him said in surprise that the SUV had rushed past like a whirlwind. Yasmina, clutching the handle, screamed that she really wanted to get off. Ian closed his eyes in fear, trying to stay in place, and asked Zero to drive slower. But the guy didn't hear them and continued to overtake Highland's cars, ending up ahead. Everyone in the black SUV was already asking in unison to save them when the car took off into the air. Our squad's SUV was the first to arrive at the Highland stronghold. Leaning out of the window, Yasmina vomited and mumbled that she wanted to die. Getting out of the car, she said that she warned them about the consequences and that they would regret it, but Zero replied that they asked for it. The captain also felt bad, but he still asked Zero if he had ever driven a bumper car before. Our hero did not answer but thought that he had driven furs. Lambert turned around and told Zero that if he touched the steering wheel again, he would jump out of the car. Soon, everyone came into the boardroom to discuss strategy and goals. Fred first suggested going through the mission briefing and pointed to the screen. He said there were 2 tasks: pretend to be wanderers and find out information, and find the sentries in the valley and interrogate them. Vinna suggested dealing with the sentries and suggested that Zero's squad camouflage itself. Zero realized that they had decided to dump the hardest part on them, since they were unfamiliar with the area and could fail the mission. He noticed that everyone was also silent because they were aware of all the benefits and losses. Fred said that since there were no objections, we could begin, and 4 people from each squad would remain at the base. Soon the guys from the Star Dragon squad arrived at the village of Wanderers. Dee said that the newcomers would be immediately noticed and suggested finding a place for them to settle down. Zero said that it was normal for wanderers to be curious about their surroundings and said that ideally they should start taking action tonight. Dee didn't like the plan and complained that the village was big and they didn't know where to look for a scout. Zero said that there is a casino in the north. There should be a bald man there. You can get all the information from him. Already in the evening, our heroes came to the Wanderers Casino, located in the Raven Forest. There was active debate at the tables about who would bet on whom and that the decision had already been made. Looking down, Dee said that he could really be in such a place. Yasmina pointed to a man sitting hugging 2 girls and said that it was him. Without thinking for a second, the girl rushed down, jumping over the railing. The next moment, Yasmina grabbed the bald man and shouted at him not to struggle. Zero said with relief that it seemed like there were no incidents and asked Ian to take over for him while he got some sleep. Around the same time, the Highland Special Forces were scouting the forest. They quietly crept into the camp, killing one of the sentries to prevent him from calling for reinforcements. Vinna, with a machine gun in her hands, gave the order to the soldiers to act quickly. They quickly and quietly got rid of all the sentries at the base, and the girl said that they did it. Soon Fred was sitting at the computer in the enemy base and said that the firewall was broken. Finally, the man succeeded, and Vinna happily said that this time their results would definitely surpass the Star Dragon. At the same time, at the Embryo base in the Black Raven Valley. The soldier reported to Deputy Nicholas that the network had been breached, and the man asked what data had been stolen. The soldier replied that they had stolen the location of the base, its diagram, and the laboratory journal. Nicholas replied that it was nothing and that they had grabbed the bait. Now they had to wait for the fish to bite. The deputy told Quan that the server had been hacked, presumably by Highland's men, and the man asked what they should do. The guy said that even though they stole false data, the existence of the base was revealed, which means it's best to start evacuation. Quan added that the enemy must first be defeated and asked to tell him if there was a need to engage in battle. The long night finally ended and the sun rose over the mountains. Zero received word that the mission was finally moving forward. He asked Ian how it went, and the guy said that they managed to find out the location of the base. But those they caught were low rank and knew little. John was clearly disappointed with the information he received and said that this was the whole result. Zero thought that if they had learned something important, then the second task would have been completed, when suddenly someone entered the room shouting. It was D, bragging that they had managed to obtain top-secret information about the Valley base. Balder asked in surprise if they had really managed to get something important, to which Fred replied that the task was completed and their squad could return back. Zero thought that something was wrong here, since only the first task was completed, which meant that something was wrong with the data. Our hero asked if they could confirm the veracity of the information, and the girl agreed. After listening to her, Zero said that they didn't think that the mission had gone too smoothly and the data might be unreliable, but the girl was confident in her abilities. D mockingly asked Zero if it was because he didn't like losing and asked what evidence he had to say otherwise. Zero wasn't going to argue with the girl and couldn't tell her the real reason for his suspicion, so he replied that it was intuition. Fred hurried away, taking D with him, adding that since there was no evidence, there was no point in going too far, and that they were leaving tomorrow at dawn. Zero thought that if no, then no. Apparently this time too, he would have to figure everything out himself. The next night, our hero prepared to make a sortie into the enemy camp. He killed several sentries to prevent them from discovering his approach. Zero spared no one and shot at every enemy soldier he could get his sights on. He thought that he had already killed many soldiers, which meant that someone should soon be sent to check out the situation. Soon the boy heard someone approaching and prepared a thin fishing line. He pounced on the approaching soldier from behind and threw the fishing line around his neck. Zero began to tighten the line, coldly watching the soldier choke. When he felt that the soldier was no longer moving, Zero let go of him. Bending over the soldier's body, he turned it over and pressed a button on the mask, which glowed yellow. He heard a radio report that everything was clear in other areas and asked why the soldier was silent. Zero picked up the radio and said that he had found a dead sentry here, thinking that the mask had come in handy sooner than he had expected. The soldiers discussed that they had found no trace of the enemy and decided to return back to base. Soon, Nicholas received a report about the killed sentries and was surprised that they had been more careful. The girl said with a smile that they would still not be able to understand which information was false and would definitely fall into a trap. Nicholas said that the chief had already begun the evacuation and that reinforcements would arrive in 5 days. He decided that while they waited, they would prepare a huge surprise for Highland. At this time, Zero, along with the enemy soldiers, arrived at the base, successfully camouflaged. He reasoned that since Reconnaissance 2 had not been completed, there must have been a secret place left on the base. The guy was surprised, because Highland invaded yesterday. They would have had enough time to evacuate. The soldiers discussed that they had received orders to evacuate and that everything was heading towards battle. One of the soldiers addressed Zero, calling him by a false name, and asked if he had discovered anything. Zero remembered the name and realized that it was the name of the guy to whom this face belonged. The guy replied that there was no optimistic news because the enemy had killed all the sentries. Zero understood that the rank-and-file soldiers did not have valuable information and that it was better to target key figures. One of the soldiers said he envied the civilians because they could be evacuated first. The commandant, whose name was Meng, called out to them and told them to get busy carrying things. Zero recognized him immediately and realized that if the base had secrets, then the big shots must know them. Our hero said he was going to the restroom, and one of the guys told him not to shirk work. Ignoring the soldiers, Zero began to pursue Maine, hoping to learn secrets. Our hero followed the man for a long time through the winding corridors. Meng turned the corner, and when Zero looked in, his eyes suddenly widened in surprise. Our hero thought in surprise that the man had disappeared, looking at a room with no other entrances. He immediately realized that there was a secret door here, but it was dangerous to linger here, because someone could appear at any moment. Zero released several mini-robots, thinking that he hadn't expected to use them here. He found a secluded place and began to monitor the situation through the cameras installed on the robots. Nothing happened for a while when suddenly some movement appeared on the cameras. A door opened in the wall and two men came out, and Zero was glad that there really was a passage there. Our hero followed the two men, believing that they definitely knew something. With an excited smile, Zero adjusted his cap, deciding that it was time to solve the mystery of this base. Our hero followed the men unnoticed in order to strike in a deserted place. The men did not notice the pursuit and walked forward, talking about something. At the post, the sentry shouted to Zero to stand still because he couldn't leave the base without a mission. Our hero said that he ran into these two men and they dropped the card. He will give it back and immediately return. As they walked deeper into the forest, Zero called out to them, saying that they had lost the map. One man thanked him, and the other wondered how he managed to lose her. Suddenly, Zero pulled a knife from his belt, and the man looked at him with fear. Zero tied them to a tree. One man called for help, and the second realized that he was not from the base. Our hero said that there were mountains all around. It was useless to shout, and ordered to quickly tell all the secret information. The man began to cry, insisting that they were just employees and knew nothing. Putting a knife to his throat, Zero said that he knew about the storage room, and the man asked in surprise where from. Realizing that our hero was not joking, the man screamed and then promised to tell everything, just so that they would leave him alone. After interrogating the men, he opened the information window and saw that Task 2 had been completed. Zero pressed the button on the mask on his forehead, which immediately dissipated, and smiled. The sun began to rise over the Highland stronghold. Ian knocked on the door of the car where Zero was supposed to be sleeping, but he didn't open it. Balder asked the captain what they would do, and he replied that they would stay and wait. Dee asked with displeasure if this was really necessary, and Vincent replied that Zero had the keys to the car. The soldier told Winna and Fred that one of the team members was missing and they would stay and wait, and the man asked who was missing. The soldier thought for a moment and said that the one who was missing was the one wearing the mask, Hank. The girl said that yesterday he rejected the information he had obtained and that today he had disappeared, and suggested that Zero might be a spy. This information was immediately transmitted to the Highland Operations Center. The colonel asked if anyone from the 13th Detachment had disappeared yesterday and not returned, and asked if they were sure. Vinna said that after they returned from the mission, Zero left without saying anything. The colonel said that he would ask for information about him later, and asked to tell what they found out. Fred said that the prisoner had been tested on a lie detector, which meant that his information was reliable. The colonel said that since everything was like this, we needed to attack them immediately before anything changed. Fred replied that if they attacked now, the agents from Division 13 would be in danger. The colonel replied that in order to achieve the goal, it would be possible to sacrifice a couple of people from the Star Dragon. He added that these soldiers are not one of them, so there is no need to worry. Zero finally reached the stronghold and thought irritably that he was a little late. One of the men he was dragging behind him asked if he was the escaped Zero, but the boy told them to shut up. Our hero set up a radio receiver and, calling John into the microphone, asked if he could be heard. The first to hear him was the captain, who began to loudly ask where he had gone, since everyone had already left and they were waiting for him at the strong point. Zero replied that he had infiltrated the Valley base and stolen classified data. The guy said that the base is divided into internal and external, and that low-ranking people only know about the external one. He added that there are many passages in the internal base through which the managers can leave unnoticed. In the colonel's office, they reported that the 13th dungeon was on the line, and he asked to connect them. The man picked up the phone and asked boredly what the matter was, what they needed from him. Balder responded that one of his men had infiltrated the base and discovered important information, offering to speak with him personally. The colonel listened carefully to the data from Zero, and in the end said that he knew everything. And then he said that the only thing he was interested in was how he knew about everything. Zero replied that he had infiltrated the Valley base and taken 2 employees prisoner, but the colonel immediately said that he was lying. Our hero thought that the Highland people were sure that he would never have succeeded in such a thing. They don't know that Zero can change his appearance, but he decided that it was not worth revealing this information. Balder asked if there was any proof, and Zero replied that he had 2 prisoners and the colonel had asked him to bring them. But despite what he heard, the colonel gave the order for the troops to advance to the Valley of the Black Raven. Balder didn't believe what he heard and was confused for a few seconds. But having collected his thoughts, he shouted that he was against it because his people were still there, and he was deliberately exposing them to danger. The colonel replied that it was not he who decided here and threw the receiver on the table. Hearing the beeps, Zero thought the colonel wanted quick results and assembled the transmitter. He took the rope, pulling the prisoners along with him, deciding that he needed to have time to leave the combat zone. Ian and Yasmina stood by their SUV, waiting for news from our hero. Suddenly, John noticed the guy and excitedly asked if he was okay. Zero was carrying 2 prisoners on his back, breathing heavily and his face covered in sweat. He told Jan and Labert to take the men's maps and infiltrate the inner sector to find out more about the evacuation. Jan immediately became nervous and said that he had no skills in espionage, but Zero said that he was their only hacker. Only he could handle it. Soon the boys arrived at the embryo base in the Valley of the Black Raven. The boys were in the guise of prisoners. Jan was nervous, saying that they couldn't give themselves away, and Lambert calmly replied that this way he would attract more attention. He also calmly approached the door, and having applied the card, heard a message that identification had been successfully completed. Jan exhaled nervously, glad that everything had gone smoothly and without incident. Soon they found themselves in a secret passage, surprised that the inner sector actually existed. Suddenly, the alarm went off, but Lambert reassured the guy, saying that it wasn't because of them. The boys noticed Nicholas walking past. He said that Highland had sent troops towards them. He said that they had already sent an armed group to meet them and ordered the rest to evacuate. Ian immediately relayed the data to Zero, saying that Embryo wanted to engage in combat with Highland. Vincent angrily said that this was too much, because Zero had obtained valuable information, and they had spat on his safety. Zero said that they were already close, and since the guys could get hurt in a skirmish, it was better for them to leave. Suddenly, Zero noticed something and looked ahead with alarm. Yasmina shouted that they had been spotted, alerting the cars driving behind. The Embryo soldiers were told that there was an enemy jeep in front of them and were ordered to destroy it. The soldier opened fire with a machine gun, aiming at our hero's SUV. Yasmina, who was sitting behind the wheel, turned slightly to the side, breaking through the fence. The girl grabbed the steering wheel of the SUV with both hands, shouting that they were being caught up. Zero said not to worry, because he had installed nitrogen acceleration, and the girl was surprised how it was possible to do this on such a big car. Yasmina stopped the guy's hand, asking him if he wasn't afraid of getting into an accident in the mountains at high speed. The SUV continued to close in, and Zero shouted at Vincent to prepare for battle. Soon, a captain armed with armor and holding a machine gun emerged from the trailer of the SUV. He pointed his weapon at the enemy vehicles and fired a burst of machine gun fire. Vincent said that the armor's stats have become more powerful. They are definitely worth the money. The enemy soldier gave the order to shoot, and first of all to destroy the guy in armor. In response to this attack, the captain opened fire and in a few moments destroyed several enemy vehicles. Zero thought that there was no end to the Embryo's forces and decided that it was high time to try out the new development. He took out round devices with blades on top from his suitcase and they flew forward. When the time came, these devices began to explode, destroying the Embryon forces. Receiving a bunch of skill points for the soldiers he killed and the mission he completed, Zero thought he had done pretty well. One soldier said one SUV took out about half of the pursuers, marveling at the firepower. Flying bombs continued to scatter across the field, blowing up enemy vehicles. The colonel said it was nothing, ordering them to continue shooting and destroy everyone. Suddenly, rocket launchers appeared from one of the enemy vehicles, and several rockets flew at our heroes. Noticing them, Zero shouted to Yasmin to quickly press the nitrogen boost, and the machine rushed forward. The rockets hit the ground behind our SUV as it sped forward. The site of the missile explosion left a huge crater. Several vehicles were hit and lay around the crater. A loud cough came from our hero's black SUV due to the smoke and dust. Zero was slightly wounded, and a thought flashed through his head. Could it be that the Highland had decided to blow them up too? Dee, watching from the command post, joyfully exclaimed that they were still alive when she saw the moving black SUV. Balder lost his temper and grabbed the microphone, shouting that they had gone too far and would be held accountable. The colonel said that he was doing his job and did not need instructions, and ordered that the boys be taken to the medics. Soon, our heroes found themselves in the camp of the Highland Logistics Squad. Zero sat on one of the medical couches while medics ran around, providing assistance to the victims. As he was about to leave, one of the medics ran up and said that, on the colonel's orders, they needed to treat the wounds. Zero replied that he did not obey the colonel's orders, but the medic replied that their commander had given the same order. Our hero thought with a smile that the commander was probably afraid that he would go to the front line alone again. He found a secluded place, took out a receiver, and having tuned it to a frequency, tried to contact John, asking if he was alive. The guy replied that he was still alive, and Zero asked how things were. John said that the outer sector is fighting back, and the inner sector is preparing to evacuate, but the exact route has not yet been announced. The guy also added that the information obtained by Highland was fake, and if they followed it, they would suffer losses. Zero asked if he had given this information to Highland, and when the boy replied that he had not yet, he asked him to hold on to the information for now. And to the question why, our hero answered that they deliberately exposed them to danger, which is why they almost died. Ian was shocked, and Lambert supported Zero's intention to not share information since Highland was so willing to kill them. Highland soldiers approached the building, firing at the enemy with machine guns and tanks. Everything around was ablaze from explosions, and people were flying in different directions from the roaring explosions. The surviving Highland soldiers moved forward, stepping over the bodies of enemies and friends. One of the soldiers shouted for everyone to move forward because the embryo base was already very close. The soldiers discussed how weak the embryo's defenses were and were happy to have obtained the information. The embryo soldiers fell one after another, unable to withstand the onslaught of the invaders. One of the soldiers shouted that the outer side of the base was blown up and they could enter. Suddenly, he felt something click under his foot and looked down in fear. Several mines exploded, scattering soldiers in different directions, and someone nearby shouted that it was an ambush. The embryo soldiers shouted that they were hooked and opened fire. The Highland soldiers had no intention of retreating and stubbornly moved forward, encouraging each other. Both sides were determined to fight to the end, and one of the soldiers said that he would definitely avenge his comrades. A soldier watching the events through a monitor told the commanders that although the ambush had worked, many had penetrated the base, and not everyone had evacuated yet. Without hesitation, Quan said that he would detain the soldiers who had invaded the base. At this time, the Embryon soldiers took up a defensive position and fired back at the invaders through their shields. Suddenly, a black shadow flew from above and landed in the middle of the battle. The Highland soldiers immediately recognized Chief Captain Quan and opened fire, but the man was faster than a bullet. The man took out his sword and, moving easily between the enemy soldiers, inflicted mortal wounds on them. In a few seconds, he finished dealing with the invaders and called them weaklings, leaving no survivors. The man fearlessly stepped forward, not noticing that he was covered in the blood of the wargs. And Highland tanks were rushing towards him, constantly shooting at the base. Quan charged forward, swinging his sword left and right, sparing no one from the Highland soldiers. Having rushed between the soldiers, the man stopped, leaving behind only one enemy soldier. Here he received a message from Nicholas that all employees had been evacuated and advised him to leave. One of the surviving soldiers whispered over the radio that their unit had encountered Quan. Fred listened in surprise to the report that everyone had died, and Dee was surprised that one person could kill a squad of 200 people. She said that the data on the location of the turnover is very different from reality. Fred realized that the data was indeed fake and said that the colonel should have listened to Hank. The colonel was surprised that the troops suffered heavy losses, and Fred said that it was worth listening to our hero. The man replied that the result justified the losses and ordered the soldiers to check the base wall for a secret passage and destroy it. The soldiers followed orders, trying to find the secret passage, not sure if it existed. One of the soldiers said that if the passage existed, they would have found it within these 2 hours. After some time, the colonel was informed that the secret passage had not been found. The man ordered Hank to be brought to him because he wanted to talk to him. The soldier said that Hank had wounded 2 guards and gone missing, and the Star Dragon people said they didn't know where he went. The colonel lost his temper, saying that there were so many soldiers there that they couldn't keep track of one man. Meanwhile, one of the military vehicles was driving forward under the cover of night. Zero was driving, watching Ian and Lambert's location on the tablet, and thought that the embryo wouldn't escape so easily. Meanwhile, in one of the military vehicles, they said that important employees had left Zabu. Nicholas said it was time for the Highland people to sign for his gift and pressed the red button. At that very second, the base was blown to pieces by a powerful explosion. The colonel, who was watching the events on his laptop, jumped up when he saw the explosion. He immediately called Fred, asking if he was alive and what had just happened. Coughing, Fred said that the base was packed with explosives and it had just detonated. Everyone was dead. The man continued to report, saying that all his soldiers were buried alive, which was a huge loss. The colonel understood that because of what had happened, all their losses had become meaningless, and the base data had been destroyed. And since he was in command of the operation, he could not avoid accusations, so he ordered that he be connected with the 13th Department. Having contacted Vincent, the colonel requested the data, and the guy reluctantly said that 2 had infiltrated the detachment, and when they received the data on the route, they would report it. The colonel thought that since the damage from the operation was so great, the result should also be significant. He gave the order to group the troops and immediately go to the vicinity of the base, awaiting orders. Meanwhile, the evacuation squad was rushing forward along the assigned route. Nicholas said that Highland fell for his trick because he never doubted his own rightness. John, who was in one of the cars, carefully monitored the situation and at the right moment turned on something on his tablet. Suddenly, loud interference was heard in the headphones of all the agents, and they did not understand what was wrong with the connection. At that very moment, one of the sentries noticed the Highland detachment and tried to convey the news. He said in confusion that he couldn't get in touch, and the second lookout said that he would launch the backup one now. But they didn't have time to do this because the car fell on its side from the explosion. Looking at the dead sentries, Nicholas asked in surprise where the enemies were coming from. Had someone really betrayed them? Kwon leaned out of the window and opened fire on the attackers, but a rocket was fired back at them. Grabbing Nicholas, the man managed to rush forward to avoid the explosion. After running away for a short while, Kwon turned around and cut down the missile aimed at them on the fly. He understood that there were too many attackers, and if they surrounded them, they would be finished. Kwon grabbed Nicholas's hand again and pulled him, saying that the evacuation helicopter was already on its way. The men continued walking through the forest when suddenly some noise attracted Kwon's attention. A car was moving towards them, and Zero was sitting inside. He saw the men through binoculars and was glad that he found them. Kwon said they were caught up and suggested it might be a reconnaissance vehicle. He said that in the forest they would be able to hide their tracks and asked Nicholas to keep up. Zero lost sight of them, and the car slowly drove along the road, looking around. Looking at the map, Zero said that the only road goes through here. Taking a suitcase and a sniper rifle, he went forward on foot. He took out a shovel and began to dig miniature bombs into the ground, creating a trap. Having finished his business, Zero took the binoculars and said that now all that was left was to wait for the prey. After a while, Nicholas fell to the ground and, breathing heavily, said that he could no longer run. But Kwon asked him to be patient a little longer because the hangar was close. Nicholas said wearily that the man could carry him, but he could not finish. A shot rang out, and Kwon managed to react and jump to the side. Immediately, what had happened dawned on him, and he turned around, covered in sweat. Nicholas's eyes rolled back, and a fountain of blood spurted from his chest. Zero smiled as he read the message that the assassination mission had been completed, and that he had received experience points. Kwon held Nicholas's body in his arms and turned towards the direction from which the shot came. Leaving his comrade's body behind, he rushed to where the killer was presumed to be, hoping to take revenge. He ran forward, holding his sword at the ready, confident that the shooter would not be able to escape. Zero was already waiting for him. He saw that the man was approaching and noted that he was very fast. Our hero fired the first shot, but the man easily dodged it. He also dodged the next shot, continuing to approach. To protect himself from the new shot, Kwon activated a red barrier. Seeing how the man managed to dodge all the shots, Zero thought it was just like snakeskin. Throwing down his rifle, Zero ran to the side and the man shouted at him that it was too late to run. Our hero was glad that the man took the bait and picked up speed, leading him into the trap. Suddenly, bombs that Zero had buried in the ground beforehand began to explode under Quinn's feet. The man was unable to avoid the explosions and was thrown back, receiving damage. Zero carefully examined the data on the blow inflicted and saw that the man was only slightly burned. He understood that the difference between their levels was too great, so he couldn't find out enough information. After thinking for a while, Zero used all his experience points to raise his level. While our hero was leveling up, Kwon had already woken up and rushed towards him. The man jumped up and raised his sword above his head, preparing to strike. Zero used the sliding fire skill and dodged the attack. Kwon was surprised and acknowledged the speed of our hero, as he was able to dodge the blow in an instant. Zero wasted no time and, straightening up, reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a pistol and opened fire on the man from close range. But Kwon immediately put up a barrier, completely blocking him from the shots. Zero realized that his body was very resilient and could not be penetrated by ordinary weapons. He decided to change the cartridges to flammable ones and immediately changed the magazine in the pistol. Kwon asked with a grin how he had the nerve to reload in front of him. He jumped again, preparing to strike again, and approached our hero. The man managed to land a blow on Zero when suddenly his eyes widened in surprise. The guy's neck, where the blow landed, was protected by armor, and the man wondered where it came from. Now it was Zero's turn to attack, and he jumped up holding a pistol in both hands. The guy opened fire with two pistols at once, and a satisfied smile played on his face. Raising his red shield again, Kwon said it was useless. But suddenly it was pierced by shots, and the man looked in disbelief at the hole in the shield. Several bullets immediately flew into this hole, burning the man's body. Kwon concentrated, gathering his body's energy, trying to suppress the fire. Zero watched these attempts with a smile, knowing that with his level he would not be able to shake off the fire. Realizing that the fire was still burning, the man looked around in confusion. Suddenly he realized that he was spending too much energy on defense and decided to finish it off quickly. Despite his burning shoulder, Kwon rushed towards Zero, who, as luck would have it, had run out of ammo. Our hero tried to avoid the blow, but the man still got him. The blow hit the face, and a warning appeared in the information window that the mask was malfunctioning. Realizing that there was no point in being cautious in a fight with him, Zero pulled out his saber from behind his back. When the mask fell off, Quan recognized the guy and whispered in surprise, "Was it really him?" Our hero's saber met the sword and the man shouted his name, Zero. Having parried the blow, they went in different directions and prepared for a new blow. Zero attacked first, lunging with his saber, but the man easily dodged it. Quan asked with a grin if he really wanted to compete with him in close combat. Zero mused that the flammable charges had taken away about half of his health. He decided that he needed to continue attacking until a convenient opportunity arose and made a capture. Quan asked if he really thought he could stop him with his weak little hands. With one jerk, the man freed himself from the grip, throwing Zero back. Our hero flew back and crashed into a tree with his back, but did not let go of the weapon. Quinn lunged towards him, swinging his sword, hoping to strike. But Zero was able to defend himself by holding his saber in front of him, stopping the blow. Having taken the blow, he realized that if it were not for the mechanical titanium hand, he would have lost his own. Gathering his strength, Zero decided to take another blow and rushed towards Quanah. He struck with all his might, but the man managed to parry it, and his legs trembled. Zero noticed this and realized that his block wasn't as good as before, meaning his attacks were having an effect. The battle continued. Our hero continued to advance, despite his fatigue. Looking closely, he saw that Quan was also tired and breathing heavily, so this was his chance. Zero activated the summon card, summoning Krinko the nose he had recently killed. Seeing the ravens and the cross with the eye, Quan immediately recognized the ability of his former comrade. The ropes wrapped around the man's body and squeezed him, preventing him from moving and lifting him up on the cross. Zero decided that since the man was a martial arts master, he definitely couldn't have more than 50 intelligence points. When he saw that the illusion had been successfully applied, the boy clenched his fist, activating the reboot skill. Our hero hit the man in the face with such force that he was thrown out of the illusion. The illusion and the blow knocked the man out of his strength and he looked angrily at the guy. Zero decided not to waste time and immediately rushed towards Quan, not giving him time to come to his senses. He plunged his saber into the man's back, piercing him through and through, and immediately received a message that the target had been killed. Zero stood over the body, reading the data on the successfully completed mission. Suddenly, something caught the guy's attention and he froze in surprise. On the ground lay a transmitter with a hologram of the embryo boss, asking if the evacuation had been successful. Suddenly, Zero appeared on the boss's screen and he screamed in surprise, asking what he was doing there and where Quan was. The boss asked where he got the valley-based data from, but Zero just asked him to guess. The man asked if he really thought that he could harm their organization with such methods, to which Zero said with a smile that he had already managed to destroy 4 of their bases. The boss got angry and said he wanted to crush the guy with his own hands, adding that he had plenty of performers. Unable to bear the guy's ridicule, the boss swept the monitor off the table, along with the papers. After some time, a soldier entered the office, and the man said to pass on his order. He said to increase the reward for Zero's capture to 5 million. The sun was still shining when the battle came to an end. Zero checked his assignment to destroy the base in the valley, which had been completed perfectly. The system calculated the reward, and this time gave what was needed: body enhancement. He checked that the main plot had only advanced 1.8% and was surprised at how little that was. But the valley was an important supplier, and by destroying it, they slowed the rate of expansion of the embryo. The sun was slowly setting, illuminating the road for the military vehicles. In one of them was a colonel, thinking that many people had died under his leadership, and this would affect the assessment. He decided to write that the people from the Star Dragon acted under his command, since they would not know what he wrote in the report anyway. Someone noticed 2 corpses on the road ahead, and everyone came out to see what was going on. The bodies of Nicholas and Quan lay there, and everyone looked at them in surprise. Ian asked if this was Zero's doing, to which Yasmina replied that no one else could have dealt with them. She added that it was unclear why he left the bodies by the road, since Highland would take all of his achievements for himself. The colonel smiled contentedly, thinking that he would gladly accept these corpses. He gave the order to several soldiers to quickly load the bodies into the car, and they ran forward. 2 soldiers bent down to the bodies, carefully lifting them up under worried glances. One of the soldiers who had picked up Quan threw him back down, shouting that there was a mine underneath him. The soldiers immediately rushed back to their cars in panic, stumbling as they went. The colonel grabbed one of the soldiers and ordered him to go and see. The soldier, his legs stiff, began to approach the body, carefully choosing where to step. Nan was shaking all over as he reached for the mine to pick it up. He gathered his strength and lifted the mine, and suddenly realized that it was too light. The soldier showed the mine and shouted that it was not dangerous, and the colonel, frightened, hid behind a soldier standing nearby. Fred said with relief that someone had simply played a joke on them, ignoring the actions of the boss. Ian giggled and Yasmina laughed out loud, saying that who else but Hank could do such a thing. The colonel got angry and shouted that there was nothing funny about it. And somewhere on the mountain, that same Hank that everyone was thinking about was aiming a rifle at someone. He lowered his arms and the bullet rushed towards the recipient, and the colonel turned around, hearing the shot. He had no idea that the shot was meant specifically for him and only managed to let out a surprised cry. The colonel's body fell to the ground with his head broken, and the soldiers watched in horror as what happened. Lowering his rifle, Zero quietly said, "What goes around comes around," and lit a cigarette. Throwing away the cigarette, he thought that he had hidden in the Star Dragon from the embryo's pursuit. He opened the phone, remembering that he was able to fill their advanced technology. He thought that at first glance they trusted him, but there was still a bug in the phone. Zero took out the bug and turned it over in his hands, realizing that the embryo's attention was now aimed at the Star Dragon. Having crushed the bug, the guy realized that he no longer had any reason to return there. Opening the information window, he calculated that there were still 94 days until open testing. The Star Dragon quest is a gold mine. You need to quickly advance in it and accumulate more funds. Putting something resembling a sail on his back, the guy decided it was time for him to leave. He pushed off from the edge of the cliff and flew on a glider, thinking that the world is huge and all roads are open. After some time, everyone gathered in the Star Dragon conference room to discuss the situation. One man said that Hank was always trying to get into trouble, but it was good that he didn't leave any evidence. And the second man said that our hero did a beautiful thing. The men gathered around the table and someone cleared their throat, attracting attention. The boss asked what was wrong with the signal, to which the man said that the last time it was transmitted was a day ago. Apparently Hank found it and threw it away. The man called Ian and asked if Hank had been in touch, and the guy replied that he had called today. He was surprised by this answer and immediately asked what he said. Jan didn't dare answer, but then he relayed Zero's words that he was going to be on the safe side. The gray-haired man asked if it was because of the murder of the colonel that he doubted they would protect him. Another man remarked that these words sounded like an excuse to run away. Suddenly, the guy sitting with the laptop said that the reward on the darknet had been updated, and now they were giving 5 million for it. The man immediately assumed that it was related to the destruction of the base in the valley, but as Embryo learned about Zero, perhaps there were spies among them. The boss cut off the conversation and said that if Hank ran away, then there were reasons for it, and for now his identity needed to be kept a secret, but a search team still needed to be sent after him. The city of Morrowind, located in the highlands, stood on the seashore. The sun in this mountain was scorching and shone so brightly that it seemed to heat everything white hot. Sitting in a cafe, our hero, having changed his appearance, thought that he had done a lot of things to prepare for the start of testing. He decided that he would first need to complete special tasks ahead of the players. Afterwards, he will need to strengthen his supply line so that he can fulfill orders on the road. And for selling the drawing of the retractable saber, you can get a Felicio card, which will cover the material issue for some time. Besides, Zero wants to find time to wreak havoc in the embryo. But the most important thing is to increase the reward limits so that it can use players from the start of testing. Our hero knew that this would be possible if he improved his reputation. For now, his reputation is at 0, but if he uses the rules, he will be able to increase it in 3 months. A beautiful building in the city of Morrowind, it housed the Highland Division of the Assassination Group. Zero walked into the building as if he had been there before and headed towards the man behind the counter. He handed him a piece of paper and a card and asked him to prepare the items from this list, knowing that he had a lot of savings. The man said that taking into account the discount, the final cost would be 800,000, and a specialist would soon install everything. Zero said a little more quietly that he also wanted to buy a ticket for the Darknet Blood Pact, and the man looked at him sternly. The man named a price, and our hero agreed, thinking that this society was a union of killers where one could become a contract soldier. Arriving at the Vitalia Hotel, Zero was still thinking that the easiest way to raise his reputation was to rise to the top. He thought that, for example, it would be possible to take the highest places in the ranking of the Union of Assassins. Zero entered the hotel hall and looked around for the administrator. He knew that this hotel had branches in major cities of many countries, and that the Darknet was behind it. The gray-haired man, who was the administrator, immediately told our hero that there were no vacancies. Zero knew very well that a common person would not be able to rent a room here. Our hero smiled broadly and asked if this was true, coming closer. He handed over the card he had received earlier and asked the man to check it again. The gray-haired man first looked at the map and then at our hero. Afterwards, he bowed to Zero and asked him to follow him. They took the elevator up to the desired floor, which was as luxurious as the foyer. The man asked to follow him because Zero needed to register. He searched for something at the counter for a bit and, taking out a piece of paper and a pen, asked me to fill in the information. He also asked our hero to come up with his code name. Zero produced a long set of letters and numbers, and the man, confused, asked him to come up with something a little shorter. Our hero said Black, but that name was already taken, and the man suggested using Mr. Black. The man said that Zero was now a preparatory class assassin, and if he completed the task, he would reach the Scorpion level. He said that private work is also allowed, but in this case, they will charge 5% of the earnings. He suggested that we review the terms and conditions before taking on the task. Zero took the tablet. Studying the tasks and the information provided surprised him a little. He saw that they were now offering 5 million for him and smiled contentedly. The embryo was still looking for him in the Western capital, and our hero was glad that they were wasting their energy in vain. The man said that Mr. Black had already received a task with a reward of 100,000. It was a small amount, and Zero immediately realized that someone had little money, so he had to hire a newbie. But our hero was looking for the positive side. If they pay little, then the task must be easy. He said that the case was in progress, and the man said that the employer wanted to discuss the details in person. Soon our hero arrived at the place specified by the customer. The customer said that the target, Eugene, was in this city. He had up to 20 guards with him, and the payment was clearly insufficient. Chandler, that was the client's name, immediately admitted that he had little money. Zero, without thinking, said that he would take on the task and stood up from the table. The man was glad that they took him on and asked how many days he would need. Zero replied seriously that by the time Chandler finished his lunch, the target would already be dead. Without waiting for an answer, Zero walked out of the restaurant under Chandler's surprised gaze. The man thought he was too confident and doubted whether he could be trusted. Suddenly, someone called out to the man, putting his hand on his shoulder, and he turned around in surprise. The man who called him said that he had thought it over again and decided that he would take on the task because he had some free time. Chandler was a little embarrassed and said that he had already given the task to someone else. But the man was not upset and said that if he needed anything else, he could contact him. Suddenly, Eugene called him and asked if he had time for some work, and he agreed. He said he sent the target information, and the killer was surprised to see that the target was Chandler. The man guessed that Chandler's target was probably his customer, Eugene. And the customer on the other end of the line asked the killer what he would say. The killer immediately agreed, because he was a couple of meters from the target. Eugene said that he then sent an advance, not even realizing that he was already in the crosshairs. Suddenly, the killer heard a shot on the phone and opened his eyes in surprise. He tried to shout to Eugene, not realizing that he was already dead. People around were shouting that they had killed Mr. Eugene and calling everyone for help. The killer was surprised that someone got ahead of him, because Eugene had many guards, and the price was small. Looking at Chandler, the killer realized that for that price he could only hire a rookie killer. He decided he wanted to see the one who had quietly eliminated Eugene, wondering who it could be. A crowd of onlookers gathered near the scene of the murder, and the police sealed off the crime scene. The police asked not to push, not to film, and not to interfere with the investigation. Someone shouted that the killer couldn't escape in broad daylight, and some passerby walked past with a smile. It was Zero who, thanks to the copy mask, was able to slip away unnoticed while everyone was sorting out what happened. Without stopping, our hero immediately went to the restaurant to place his order. He walked into the room where Chandler was sitting and said that everything was ready, and Chandler said that he was really strong. Chandler handed Zero the suitcase, saying that it contained his reward, and offered to count it. Our hero said that it was unnecessary and left the room, adding that he had business to attend to. As he was leaving the restaurant, he felt that someone was following him and began to look around. He noticed a man sitting at a table pretending to read a newspaper. Zero turned to him and glared so angrily as if saying, "Why are you staring at me?" Meeting this gaze, the man froze as if he had fallen into a trance. Our hero walked on, and the man trembled with fear, amazed at his energy. Zero returned to the hotel, and the receptionist said that since he had completed the quest, he was now a Scorpion level and had more powers. He added that from now on, in all Vitalia hotels, he will be treated as a VIP. The man said it was the first time he had seen someone level up so quickly, and he was looking forward to seeing the results. Zero asked smugly where he now stood in the ranking of Darknet killers. The man replied that only top-class killers make it onto the lists, adding that the youth are in a hurry to rise. Zero thought that the top 10 spots should be occupied by level 40 assassins, and only 3 should be serious opponents. The rating is based on completed tasks and other achievements, and the man was worried that his confidence had been hurt. He decided to cheer up the guy and told him not to lose heart. Judging by the first task, a bright future awaits him. Zero realized that he needed to get to work on the task and asked to see the available tasks. The man asked if he wanted to watch something more serious and handed him a tablet with all the tasks. He said beginners are encouraged to start with something simpler and work their way up. But Zero didn't really listen to him and chose the task, saying that he would carry it out. The man took the tablet and, seeing what task our hero had chosen, was stunned. He shouted that many experienced killers had been assigned to this task, so how could a newbie take it on? Zero said that he would rather be killed by his saliva and asked to prepare everything necessary. The man studied Zero carefully, as if weighing whether to agree or refuse. He silently took Zero's card and placed it on a special device. He said that he warned about everything that could happen, and if anything happened, it would not be his fault. He threw the folded sheet of paper into the pneumatic mail system, and it flew through the pipes to the recipient. A man in a jacket received it, and after pressing something on the computer, received a message that the data had been entered. Soon, a message came from the large monitor that the data on the mission battle rows had been updated. The gray-haired man said that he was registered, and Zero immediately saw a message about a new task. After reading that there was an additional reward for it, Zero realized that the task was not easy and decided to prepare well. Our hero went to the base of Felicio's group, preparing for the mission. He has already reached the maximum level for his main class, and there is no point in wasting experience on creating new drawings. He created new cartridges, figuring that on this mission he would be without partners and they would be useful to him. He read the information about the mission. The battle rows consist only of girls, and it is located in the Sumal Desert. There are a lot of enemies there and they have their own mechanic, so he decided to create a directional weapon. He created scanning glasses, and although it wasn't what he wanted, they could come in handy too. On his second try, he managed to create the famous EMP, which creates interference, which is perfect for the desert. Zero thought that mines might still be useful and decided to create another blueprint. He combined his knowledge and the basics of blueprinting and began to create mines. After a series of failures, he finally managed to create sending mines. Zero happily thought that he had finally managed to create the necessary drawing, and in the future, he could create others for specific cases. Having collected the mines, he also packed his rifle and, deciding that the preparations were complete, set off. He called Antonio from Felicio and said he needed a cargo helicopter. The man said that they use them for large-scale operations, and even though he is a VIP client, he will have to pay for it. Antonio asked how many people he would be transporting and what time the helicopter would be needed, and our hero replied that he would be alone, right now. The man said that this was a huge expense for one person, and asked if he was sure, to which our hero replied that he was sure. Soon the helicopter was already flying over the Sumal Desert. Our hero watched the base through binoculars, realizing that it was truly impregnable. It would be better to set up an ambush and lure them out. He ordered Antonio to land the helicopter and prepare an SUV for him. The man added that the base was nearby, and he had to go about his business, and wished our hero good luck. In one of the cars driving through the desert, Dorothy was asked if there were no results this time either. The girl said they searched several sectors, but there were no signs of felony. She added that several of her employees were killed in battle with Gaydon's men. The girl replied that they had already lost many during the search, and that the goals of this felony were not worth the lives of the dead. The old woman sitting next to her frowned and put her hand on the girl's shoulder. She realized that the girl was not a local, and told them that there was once an oasis here, and they lived in abundance until the war came for the legendary desert control device. Many military men came here in search of felony, and they, having lost their homeland, became mercenaries for them. They give their lives to help search for Felonia, and in return they receive resources, hoping for further life. Zero didn't waste any time and prepared a trap by burying mines in the ground. Having finished his work, our hero took the binoculars and looked towards the target. He saw that the cars were driving along the right route and thought contentedly that here was the catch. Taking out his rifle, Zero went behind a large rock. Now he just had to wait for the target to get closer. Soon the car drove up to the device lying on the ground and ran over it with its wheel. At the same second, a yellow ball appeared around the car, emitting lightning. One of the girls recognized that this was an EMP weapon and shouted that they were under attack. Dorothy thought that if it was Gaydon, it was strange because they hadn't been chasing them before. The girl got out of the car and shouted to everyone to get ready for battle. Zero took up a position on the hill and, loading his rifle, fired one shot. But he was not aiming at people, but at a mine, which immediately exploded and smoke came out of it. Enemy vehicles began to explode one after another, and the entire field began to be covered in purple smoke. The girl started coughing and falling to the ground, and immediately realized that it was poisonous gas. After breathing in the poisoned gas, the girls felt dizzy. One by one, they began to fall to the ground, poisoned by the clever mine. Some switched off faster than others and called their friends by name, but then they themselves fell down. In the end, only Dorothy and a few other girls remained in the ranks and looked with annoyance at their comrades lying on the ground. Suddenly, a shot rang out, piercing one of the girls, and Dorothy turned around at the sound. She shouted that they couldn't stand still, they had to kill the attacker, and they rushed towards Zero. Our hero shot back at the approaching girls, making one shot after another. Dorothy glared at the guy, screaming that he was finished, and rushed forward. Seeing the girl approaching, our hero took a pistol out of his jacket. Dorothy jumped up and swung her halberd, preparing to strike. Using the sliding fire skill, Zero easily dodged the girl's attack. He immediately started shooting from the pistol, not giving the girl time to prepare. Some of the bullets hit their target, but she still reached for the gun behind her back. With a smirk, she pulled a machine gun from behind her back and pointed it at our hero's head. Zero tensed up a little from this turn of events and stared intently into the barrel of the machine gun. Dorothy said that whoever he was, he couldn't survive a shot from that distance. And without waiting for an answer, she fired the entire clip at our hero. The bullets flew straight at Zero, hitting their target, and a cloud of smoke appeared around him. But when the smoke cleared, Dorothy asked in horror how such a thing was possible. All the bullets were stopped and none of them hit our hero. He looked at the girl with a smile, and his entire body was covered in thin, scaly armor. The boy raised his pistol and fired, thinking that most warriors blindly believed that a sniper was easier to defeat in close combat. The girl's eyes opened wide and stared into the distance, frozen there forever. After completing the mission, Zero thought that it would have worked with an ordinary sniper, but he was not ordinary. At the Battle Rose base, a crowd gathered around the bodies of their slain comrades. One of the bodies belonged to Dorothy. Someone reported that they were all killed with the same weapon. The head of the Battle Rose said that the attacker was a sniper working alone. The head was angry and assumed that this was another wanted killer. The girl called and reported that they were attacked again. 20 people were dead, and she asked for reinforcements. Smiling evilly, she thought that he was arrogant and impulsive, and now he would be a target. Soon, professional killers arrived at the base, all named Yarmo, only the number was different, 3, 5, and 7. Number 3 ordered a situation report, and the girl said that their enemy was an accurate and trained sniper. One girl said that he went to the southeast. There are only 3 structures, the closest one is Felicio. Lala was a mechanic and said that there were fragments of mines here. The enemy anticipated their actions and set up an ambush. She added that such a model is unknown to her, and the body is made from Felicio materials. Number 3 said that they were no joke and that they could not fight on their territory. After thinking, the man said that since the girls were their target, they would be bait. He suggested that they go as usual, and as soon as the enemy appears, they will immediately squash him. The head gave the order to the girl to do as he said, and she obeyed. And our hero returned to the base of Felicio's group when it was already dark. He read that the Battle Rose had support from outside. No wonder so many killers fell. Antonio replied that the Sumal military forces had their own sponsors, and our hero's client, the Chisrod's family, was one of them. Zero said that a lot of effort was being put into finding Felonia and asked what it was all about. Antonio replied that he didn't know, but Zero managed to detect the insincerity in this answer. Our hero thought that there was some important secret hidden in Felonia, which was connected to the hidden reward of the quest. He understood that since the enemy had a patron, he would send reinforcements to him. Having put the papers with information on the table, he thought about what was the best thing to do. Zero told the man with a smile that he needed a driver so he could shoot. Antonio said that our hero's task is why he should help him. Zero responded by saying that traveling was not an easy task and offered to go with him and enjoy the scenery. The man pointed his finger at the window, outside which there was pitch black night, and asked what landscapes they were talking about. Zero replied that in these places you can find mirages, and in the mountains, water, adding that the desert is an amazing place. Antonio replied that they were not close enough to travel together. But Zero was not going to back down and offered to be friends with the man. The man said that since he was offering to participate in the task, the reward would have to be divided. Zero said that everything was correct and offered him 5% of the reward. Antonio said that this was too little, since the driver was the first target, and offered 20%. This proposal angered our hero, and he suggested going and robbing someone. In response, the man only smiled slyly and said that this is exactly what he was doing, and Zero had to agree. At the Battle Rose base, they were already waiting for our hero to appear. The girl in the control room turned around and shouted that the target was in Zone C. Number 3 walked up to the monitor and said with a smile that he had come after all. On the screen, you could see Zero burying something in the ground, and the man called him a cretin. He ordered that a small detachment be sent out as bait, and the girl accepted the order. Zero was already sitting in the car, and lowering his binoculars, thought that they were already close. He asked Antonio, who was acting as the driver, to drive southwest. Yarmo 3 and 5 were also in the car. Number 3 saw our hero through binoculars and shouted that it was time to kill him. Antonio drove the car forward through the dense desert, escaping from his pursuers. Zero shot back at them, leaning out of the window with a rifle at the ready. He fired flammable cartridges, shooting accurately at the target. A bullet pierced the windshield of the pursuer's car, and the girl angrily said that they needed to be caught up with. The white SUV raced forward, but its pursuers grew in number and were getting closer. Looking through the binoculars, Zero thought that they wanted to surround them, when suddenly his eyes widened in surprise. An enemy bullet hit his head, and if it weren't for the armor, our hero would no longer be alive. Holding his wounded head, the guy said that they had set up an ambush and told him to urgently go to the designated place. The man pressed the gas pedal to the floor, and the car jerked forward. Suddenly, he said in surprise that the enemies were here too, looking at several enemy vehicles blocking the way. One of the enemy soldiers smiled and told them to go to hell. He started shooting at our hero's car, firing not only bullets but also a missile. Seeing her, Antonio grabbed the steering wheel, swerving slightly to the side to avoid the explosion. At first, a hail of bullets fell on the car, but none of them damaged it. The rocket hit the ground a meter away, exploded, and the car was thrown up slightly. The guys somehow managed to stay in place during the explosion, and Antonio said that they escaped unscathed. Watching the car drive away, the guy with the machine gun asked if they really thought they could escape. He added triumphantly that there was nowhere to run, and enemy vehicles appeared from all sides. Antonio said with annoyance that they were surrounded, looking at the enemy vehicles. Zero quickly looked around for an exit and saw that there were only 2 cars in one place. The threat was minimal there. He speculated that the enemies were deliberately avoiding the area where our hero had set up traps. Zero understood perfectly well that the slightest explosion would detonate the mines, and then it would definitely be the end for him. Suddenly, Zero noticed a car with spikes on its bumper rushing towards them. It was a huge armored SUV, and on the roof sat that same guy with a machine gun. Antonio asked in fear what it was and added that it was time for them to run away. But Zero thought differently and said that even though it was risky, they were going south. The man said he hoped our hero knew what he was doing and turned the wheel to the side. The car with our heroes drove out to meet 2 enemy vehicles, who were trying to stop it from passing. The man with the machine gun rode behind them, smiled evilly, and said that they would not escape. Suddenly, Zero leaned out of the window and fired at the car pursuing them. The bright blue bullet flew forward, straight towards the car, and the man froze in surprise. But the bullet did not reach the car and suddenly exploded, shining with a blinding white light. Wiping his watery eyes, the man realized it was a flash grenade and called our hero a nasty dog. Despite the flash, the man still grabbed the machine gun and opened fire. The ground beneath our hero's SUV burned and exploded, and bullets occasionally hit the roof. One of the enemy vehicles crashed into a white SUV and almost flipped it over. Yarmo stuck his head out of the crashed car and shouting, "Follow them!" began shooting from a machine gun. Seeing that they were being quickly overtaken, our hero told Anthony to step on the gas. The man pressed the button without asking questions, and blue light poured out of the exhaust pipe. The white SUV flew forward at high speed like a comet. Antonio said with a smile that they had gotten away when suddenly an SUV with a machine gun on the roof appeared behind them. The chase continued. Our heroes tried to break away from their pursuers, but they stubbornly followed. Suddenly, Zero smiled contentedly, took out some kind of black device and pressed a button. At that very moment, a mine exploded on the road, enveloping the pursuing vehicles in a white glow and flashes of lightning. The man, who had been holding the machine gun, fell onto the roof due to the explosion. In one of the cars, a man was asked in surprise what had just happened. A voice came from another car saying that everything had stalled and was standing still. The girl wanted to transmit something on the radio, but it broke down, and she realized that it was because of the EMP. The man told them not to be afraid. The enemy had only one vehicle and ordered them to prepare their weapons. And the girl suddenly remembered that all the electronics in Dorothy's car had burned out and realized that they were trapped. She ran out of the car and, turning around, saw a mine buried in the ground. The girl shouted that they needed to run and added that everyone should be careful. Suddenly, a bullet flew out of the barrel of the rifle and headed straight for a mine sticking out slightly from the ground. The girl saw the trajectory of the bullet and, cursing, rushed forward even faster. And when the bullet reached the mine and it exploded, the girl was already waist-deep in the ground. This explosion detonated the others, and soon a series of explosions was blazing across the field. Zero watched the explosions from afar, while the information window constantly updated with information about the injuries inflicted. Lighting a cigarette, Zero asked with a smile whether he was surprised or shocked. Antonio replied that he had not seen such a beautiful landscape for a long time, and Zero wished him to enjoy it to his heart's content. Our hero looked through the information about the experience points for killing Yarmo 3, 5, and 7, and was surprised by their nicknames. Suddenly, Zero realized that there was one more missing from the list of those killed and frowned. He began to look around, searching for a survivor, and reached for his gun. Suddenly, a hand with a knife appeared from the ground, and then a girl jumped out of it and aimed at Antonio. But the man sensed a threat and quickly grabbed the girl's hand, preventing her from striking. Antony grabbed her and threw her forward with all his might like a rag doll, and Zero was already waiting for her ahead, aiming his pistol, smiling solemnly. Our hero fired several shots, which hit the target. The girl fell to the ground, and Zero received a message that he received experience for killing her. With an evil smile, he said that here was the escaped fish. With fire blazing all around, Antonius asked what was next. Zero replied that they would pursue the enemy to the Battle Rose base. He added that they were currently suffering huge losses and enemy forces would want to take advantage of this, so he could just wait. Antony was surprised by these words and asked how long ago our hero had planned this. Zero asked in response that it was really possible to predict everything. They thought that there was only one trap, but he preferred to play it safe. He told Antony that the guy had performed the operation brilliantly and had come out unharmed, and said goodbye to him. Zero was already driving forward alone when he suddenly saw flashes of light ahead. Looking at the explosions ahead at the base, he realized that the enemies had already begun their attack. The man commanded the troop, shouting for them to go forward and drive them out of the desert. As they fired back, the girls shouted that they shouldn't count on it while trying to defend the base. But they were unable to defend themselves, because in response they were shot at from a tank. The enemies were advancing more and more actively, leaving no survivors, and were approaching the base. Lala said they were short-handed, and their defensive structures were destroyed, adding that the enemy would soon invade. The leader understood that they were weak now, and that was why they became the enemy's target, deciding that while the others were holding them back, they needed to hide. The woman told Lael to take 5 people and leave through the secret passage. Looking at the burning landscape outside the window, they both knew it was time to leave the base. Zero got out of the car, thinking that since there was no notification of the mission's completion, it meant that the main team had managed to escape. Having lit a cigarette, our hero released the drone and, taking out a tablet, observed the area. He soon spotted a car speeding away from the base and immediately realized it was them. The head sat in the car, looking tiredly out the window, and said that they would soon reach the neutral zone. Suddenly there was an explosion, almost overturning the car they were riding in. The girl leaned out the window, trying to find her attacker, not believing that they had been caught. Suddenly she saw a studded SUV rushing towards them, from which they were firing. The girl punched the paneling and realized the killer was driving an SUV and said he had gone too far. Rockets flew at the car, and it began to shake and bounce from each explosion. Barely holding onto her seat, the girl told them to run quickly. They wouldn't be able to withstand his striking power. Another rocket flew at the car, and everything around was ablaze from explosions. A boy with his grandmother was walking nearby. He turned around in surprise and said that someone was fighting there, but she asked the boy not to be distracted and to concentrate on searching for Felonia, and Zero continued to pursue, surprised that they were still trying to escape. One of the rockets exploded right behind the car, and the explosion created a large hole. Suddenly, the hole began to glow yellow, right in front of the people walking forward. The grandmother and the boy froze in place, not believing their eyes. Zero, having received notification that he had completed the hidden mission to find Felonia, also completed the mission to destroy the Battle Rose. Our hero thought in surprise that he had accidentally detonated it in the right place. He rushed forward, glad that he had also completed the task with the Battle Rose. Zero drove past a huge hole that had been opened by the explosion, and refugees had already gathered around it. Despite the destruction of the base, the leader and mechanic were still alive and racing away. Zero saw the car moving forward and was angry that this spike was very slow. To slow down the SUV, our hero detonated an EMP and the car stopped immediately. The mechanic immediately understood what kind of weapon it was and shouted that he probably wanted to destroy them with a spike. Zero got out of the car and, standing on the roof, told them to show themselves so that they could finish everything. The head became enraged and, baring her fangs angrily, rushed towards Zero. She picked up speed and raced towards Zero, screaming that he was asking for trouble. In response, our hero fired several bullets from his pistol. Seeing the shots, she quickly erected translucent shields in front of her. All the bullets hit the erected barrier and, flattened, fell to the ground. Zero realized that her ability was a force field. It was difficult to deal with because it could block charges. Realizing that regular bullets were useless now, he jumped up, changing his position and changing the magazine on the go. Zero fired several bullets again, and they also crashed into the field. However, the color of the bullets this time was green. The next moment, the girl began to choke, realizing that these were poisonous projectiles. Zero knew that her ability would have no effect on gases, and realized that he could win that way. The head rushed towards our hero, realizing that in order to win, she needed to close the distance. Zero shot back as best he could, but the girl was very fast and deftly jumped from one barrier to another. Once on top, she gathered several barriers and activated the force field push skill. Zero defended himself with his saber against this blow, but it was so strong that he was pushed back a couple of meters. As they closed the distance, the leader shouted that he had brought this on himself and that she would help him die. Having come very close to our hero, she activated another skill, Force Field Execution. But Zero managed to activate his sliding fire skill and avoided the blow. Our hero realized that he had no choice and would have to use force. The leader replied that he was very weak in close combat and gathered a force field around his fist. She swung and struck forward with force, and a beam of light shot out from her hand. She said with a triumphant smile that he was finished because no one could survive the damage from the impact. However, Zero was protected by the armor, and with a smile asked her to repeat what she said. Our hero drew his saber and applied the overcharge skill to it, preparing to strike. The head didn't expect such a turn of events, and watched in surprise as Zero's blow pierced her shields one after another. Having broken through all the barriers, Zero struck the girl and stopped far behind her. Despite the strong blow, the girl continued to stand on her feet, although she was breathing heavily. The head realized that it would be difficult to cope with Zero, wiping the blood from her cheek. Suddenly, Lala ran up to the leader and immediately attacked Zero, but he managed to jump back. The girls stood back to back, preparing for battle. Lala was ready, but the leader was already tired. Looking at the new girl, Zero guessed that she was a mechanic and one who was skilled in close combat. He noticed her gloves and realized that they were her weapons, and while he was thinking, the girls decided to attack. They scattered in different directions at lightning speed, and Zero just watched them in surprise. The leader approached Zero and used the force field skill Whirlwind again. Zero raised his saber again, but was unable to fully block the blow and was thrown back. Before the guy could get to his feet, Lala attacked him, but Zero was able to dodge the blow. Looking at the mark left by the girl's blow, Zero thought that she was dangerous. Our hero ran away from Lala, deciding that it was not worth engaging in close combat with her. But he couldn't run far, because the leader was approaching him and asking where he was going. Zero managed to put out his mechanical arm at the last moment to block the blow. Our hero tried to follow Lala's movement so as not to cross paths with her. The leader immediately noticed that Zero was only defending himself, but not attacking, and realized that it was because of Lala. She shouted to the mechanic to distract his attention while she waited for the moment to deliver the fatal blow. The girls rushed to Zero to carry out their plan. Lala immediately attacked our hero. He managed to dodge, but the head immediately attacked him. The girl was able to break through Zero's defense, and he received a blow, flying back. Zero thought that they were tying him hand and foot, and he wouldn't be able to defeat them unless he took a risk. He activated the electromagnetic armor, all-round defense skill. After that, he rushed towards Lala, shouting that he would deal with her first. She was confused as to why Zero had suddenly gone on the offensive when this was not how things had been planned. As Zero approached, Lala clenched her fist and punched the guy in the chest with all her might. But Zero only smiled from this blow, and the durability of his armor was still 100%. The girl asked in surprise what it was and struck again. But Zero defended himself from him and hit the girl back, knocking her off her feet. He applied a hold and twisted the girl's arm back so that she could not move. But then the leader arrived and hit our hero in the back, shouting for him to let the girl go. Spitting out blood, Zero smiled evilly and swung his saber. He pierced Mechanic Lalu right through, burying his saber right up to the hilt. The girl fell to the ground, and Zero saw a message about experience points for the kill, and the leader looked at what happened in horror. Unable to hold back her tears at the loss of her loyal comrade, the leader screamed at the top of her voice. Zero stood over Lala's body, looking at the head, and blood was dripping from his saber. He smiled and told the girl not to worry, because she would soon go after her. The head stood in front of Zero, preparing to strike, and only the wind broke the silence. Suddenly, she jumped up from her seat, screaming that she wouldn't give up her life just to kill the guy. Zero dodged one blow, but the girl did not stop and immediately prepared for a new blow. She brought down a blow from above, but our hero managed to dodge it. The head did not give up, and swinging her fist, screamed, delivering another blow. Zero wanted to shoot, but she pushed away the hand with the gun. The head immediately pushed off the barrier and hit the guy from above with all her might. He flew down, thinking about how she had no control over her power at all, and he wondered what would happen first. She would run out of power or die. Sparing no effort, she rushed towards Zero and gathered strength in her hands, delivering another blow. Our hero somehow dodged the blue flow of power, almost losing his balance. She shouted at him not to think about running away, but suddenly her strength left her, and she was unable to create a force field. With a maniac's smile, Zero thought that this was his chance and fired a shot from his mechanical hand. The blow pierced the girl's leg and she fell to the ground, unable to get up. Looking ahead, she asked Lala for forgiveness, as she was unable to avenge her. Zero fired a few more shots, each one hitting the head. The girl lay on the ground, looking ahead, and Zero received a message about experience points for killing her. Smoke was coming out of the guy's mechanical hand, and he was breathing heavily, thinking that they were done. He turned back to look around, and Lala's gloves caught his eye. Taking them off, he thought that they were really not bad and he wouldn't refuse such gloves. He looked ahead and decided that now was the time to study Felonia. Soon, Zero came to a hole in the ground and saw the tracks of several people going down. Following their footsteps, Zero realized that the pilgrims had already visited here. Looking around, Zero saw that someone had made a passage in the rock, and the wind was carrying a metallic smell from there. Taking a flashlight, the guy shone it forward, noticing that there was something there. In front of him, there was a large hole in the wall. The glass in it was broken. Looking closer, he saw something like a checkpoint. The wires were torn, and green moss appeared in some places. Zero walked forward, entering the hole in the wall, but soon stopped and frowned. He stopped at a fork in the road that led him down two different paths. While Zero was deciding which one to take, he heard a sound ahead and frowned. People were running from one of the forks, shouting that a monster was chasing them. People ran headlong, and behind them an inhuman growl was heard. The roar was so loud that Zero had to cover his ears and thought it was an animal roaring. The people ran to Zero, and one man said that a monster was chasing them. The girl, who also managed to run, said that such a vile place could not be felony. One of the guys suggested that this might really be the place everyone was looking for. The girl replied that the treasures were magical, there could be no monsters near them, and called Zero to leave with them. Zero moved on, remembering the system message that said Felonia was here. He thought that according to the game description, there were no magical things on the planet Aquamarine. Zero guessed that by magical treasures, they most likely meant technology. He remembered his gaming experience, and judging by it, pilgrims are guides who inform in which direction the monster is. Putting on his gloves, Zero wondered where to go. To the right, where the pilgrims came from, or if they wanted to confuse him and take him to the left. Putting on his glasses, he realized that the unknown was more frightening than the monster, and decided to go right. Our hero walked through the abandoned rooms, wondering what kind of stench there was. Covering his nose from the stench, he looked down and saw a huge paw print. The next moment, he saw a monster looking at him, and he recoiled in surprise. In front of him stood a huge creature with horns. Its eyes glowed red, and its mouth was full of huge teeth. Zero readied his weapon and rushed to attack, running behind the beast. Suddenly, he noticed that the monster was absent-mindedly turning around, and he quickly covered his mouth. Without making a sound, our hero crept further, realizing that the monster was night-blind. Looking at the monster from behind the wall, he thought with a smile that he had made the right decision by putting on night vision goggles. Suddenly, our hero felt a touch below and abruptly lowered his head. Several pairs of monster eyes looked at him from under the bars, and some reached out their hands towards him. Zero jumped back in fear, realizing that there were also monsters under the floor and that it was very dangerous here. Our hero rushed forward along the corridors, trying not to make too much noise so as not to attract the attention of the monsters. Finally, he stopped and, looking around, froze in surprise, looking ahead. In front of him on the table lay a human skeleton, and next to it was a notebook with notes. Zero opened it and began to read. Judging by the entries, it was a diary, which said that the professor was working on the Felonia serum and tested it on rats. But it did not bring results, and he decided to conduct an experiment on people. After the serum was injected into the person, no particular changes were noticed in him, and this greatly upset the professor. As a result, the experiment was closed. The scientists were going to be transferred to another building, and this place was going to be destroyed. The professor took several samples with him, and the rest of the serum was supposed to be destroyed, which greatly upset Zero. Suddenly, he saw a suitcase on the shelf from which a green glow emanated. He smiled, because the suitcase contained the Felonia serum, and the message said that it was imperfect and could cause mutations. Zero was so engrossed in his reading that he didn't notice how the monster had snuck up on him, and cursing, he ran away. And the monster was already standing behind him, and swinging its huge paws, was preparing to strike. The monster almost struck our hero, but Zero quickly came to his senses and came up with a plan. He jumped to the side using the sliding fire skill and fired several shots at the monster. Zero shot at the monster without stopping, but did too little damage. He knew that the monster's level was higher than his, but it was in very bad condition, so he had a chance. While Zero was thinking, the monster approached him and hit the guy with his elbow. Even though Zero covered himself with his hands, he was still thrown aside, and he thought it was painful. Wiping the blood from his mouth, Our hero decided that now was his chance and rushed towards the monster. Being behind the monster, the guy jumped up and prepared his weapon to strike. Our hero slashed with all his might at the monster's neck, hoping to deliver a fatal blow. The monster roared, waved its paw, and grabbing our hero's hand, threw him in front of itself. Zero didn't understand how he could be alive and even moving, given that he had a cut on his head. Gathering an electric charge with his glove, he wondered if he would be able to move after that. Our hero rushed towards the monster, but suddenly fell to the ground and slipped under it. With all his might, the guy hit the monster's chest with the glove's charge, and it found itself enveloped in lightning discharges. With its chest pierced, the monster fell to its knees, bleeding the fluid that replaced its blood, but did not die. Zero thought angrily that he was resilient, and taking out his pistol, fired several times. All the bullets hit their target, and the monster stretched upwards with its last breath. Zero breathed heavily as he looked at the slain monster and the message telling him how much experience he had received for killing it. Our hero was trying to catch his breath, thinking that it was not easy, when suddenly he heard some sound. One huge claw pierced the floor grate as if it were cardboard. Soon, monsters that looked like mutated cockroaches began to crawl out of this hole.